He stole my car, officer, and I want him arrested right now." The metallic click of the unfastened handcuffs echoed off the concrete pavement of the gas station. The heavy smell of gasoline mixed with the exhaust fumes from the police cruiser. I stood leaning against the cold silver hood of the Porsche, listening to my 34-year-old son demand my arrest on Father's Day. Chase pointed a trembling finger at me. His face was flushed, and the practiced smile he usually saved for our wealthiest clients was completely gone. He took the keys right off the table. "That is my vehicle. I bought it, I financed it, and he has absolutely no right to touch it." Megan stood 3 steps away. My daughter. At 39, she had spent the last 18 months rebuilding her life as a small business accountant after Chase convinced me to fire her from her role as our financial controller. She did not yell. She did not point fingers. She just watched her brother with a quiet, calculating stillness. "This is her fault," Chase said. His voice bounced off the metal canopy above the gas pumps. "She is the woman who ruined our company books. Now she is manipulating an old man into stealing just to get back at me." The police officer held up both of his hands, stepping between us. The heavy utility belt around his waist creaked with the movement. "Okay. Everyone needs to stop talking at the same time. Sir, lower your hand." The officer turned to look at me. I was 61 years old, wearing a tailored suit, pinned against a luxury car in the middle of a Sunday afternoon. The humiliation burned in my chest. To understand how a son calls the police on his own father over a car, you have to look at what happened. Exactly 30 minutes earlier, we had planned a quiet brunch inside the main showroom of Carter Heritage Motors. The dealership was closed for the holiday. The massive glass doors were locked to the public, and the Texas heat baked the asphalt outside. I had secretly invited Megan, hoping the quiet atmosphere might force Chase to finally apologize for the ugly way she was pushed out of the family business. That was my mistake. I had spent years thinking I could manage the tension between my children by simply putting them in the same room and asking for peace. Megan arrived exactly on time, carrying a small box of pastries. She wore a simple gray blazer, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the empty desks, as if looking for the ghost of her old career. Chase arrived 20 minutes late. He did not bring food. He brought a thick leather binder stamped with the logo of Red Mesa Automotive Partners. He dropped the binder onto the glass table, completely ignoring his sister. "We need to talk about the acquisition offer, Dad. They want an answer by tomorrow morning." I looked at the binder, then at the pastries Megan had carefully set out. "It is Father's Day, Chase. We agreed to leave the business at home today. I invited your sister here so we could act like a family." Chase scoffed, pulling out a chair and sitting heavily. He tossed his phone onto the table. Right next to it, he placed the heavy silver key fob for the Porsche demonstrator. It was a company vehicle, one of several we kept in the executive fleet. But Chase treated it like a personal trophy. He kept his hand resting near the keys, tapping his fingers against the glass. "We are not a functional family right now," Chase said, staring directly at me. "We are a failing business. We are losing money because of the massive inventory errors Megan left behind. Red Mesa is offering us a way out, and you are stalling because you feel guilty." Megan did not raise her voice. She simply crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. "Those inventory errors were not mine, Chase. You know exactly what I found in the system before Dad signed my termination papers." "You found your own mistakes," Chase snapped. His voice grew louder, filling the empty showroom. "You lost track of the floor plan financing. You caused the liquidity crisis. Now I am trying to save 300 jobs. And you are sitting here playing the victim." My jaw tightened. I had spent 18 months watching my daughter work late nights for small retail clients, stripped of the title she had earned, while my son drove company cars and held court in the executive suite. "Chase, that is enough. You will not speak to her that way. Not today. I want you to apologize." Chase laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "Apologize? For saving the company you are too weak to run anymore?" I am still the chairman of this board, I said, my voice dropping low. And I am still your father. You will show some respect. Chase leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. He looked at me with a coldness I had never seen before. You are just an old man who cannot admit he is losing his grip. I wish you had never been my dad. The words hung in the quiet air of the showroom. Megan looked away, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Something broke inside me. It was not anger. It was a deep, exhausting sadness. I had spent my entire life building Carter Heritage Motors. I had handed Chase the position of chief operating officer because he was bold, because he knew how to sell, because he looked the part. I had chosen the image of success over the quiet competence of my daughter. Now, the boy I had protected was looking at me like an obstacle he needed to clear from the road. I did not yell. I stood up from the table. I reached across the glass and picked up the Porsche keys. Chase froze. The arrogant posture vanished instantly. His eyes snapped down to my hand, then back up to my face. What are you doing? I am going for a drive, I said, putting the keys in my pocket. Since this is a company vehicle assigned to the executive fleet, I am taking it. I will see you on Monday. I expected him to throw a tantrum about disrespect. I expected him to argue about his executive privileges. I did not expect pure, unadulterated panic. Chase jumped up, his chair scraping violently against the floor tiles. You cannot take that car. Put the keys down. It is a demonstrator model, Megan said, watching him closely. Her eyes narrowed. Dad is the registered user on the fleet authorization. Why do you care if he drives it? It has to be here, Chase stammered, stepping toward me. He reached for my arm, but I stepped back. It needs to be on the lot. I have a scheduled inspection tomorrow morning. The vehicle has to be in its designated spot by 8 o'clock. I will have it back by 7, I said. I turned and walked toward the showroom doors. You cannot take it, Chase yelled, his voice cracking. Bring it back right now. I pushed through the glass doors, the heavy Texas heat hitting my face. I walked to the silver Porsche parked in the VIP space, unlocked it, and got inside. As I pulled out of the lot, I saw Chase standing on the sidewalk, holding his phone to his ear, his face pale and frantic. I drove aimlessly for about 10 miles. I needed the air conditioning and the silence to clear my head. I was angry at myself for letting the situation deteriorate. I was angry at Chase for the insult, but more than anything, I was confused by his reaction. Chase was a man who cared about appearances. Begging for a set of car keys in front of the sister he despised was entirely out of character. The red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror just as I passed the city limits sign. I pulled into the nearest gas station, shifting the car into park. I rolled down the window, pulling out my driver's license. The officer approached cautiously, his hand resting near his belt. Step out of the vehicle, please, the officer said. I complied, stepping out into the heat. Is there a problem, officer? Was I speeding? We received a 911 call about a stolen vehicle matching this description and license plate, the officer said. The caller stated you took the keys from a private desk and drove off without permission. Before I could fully process the absurdity of the situation, a black SUV swerved into the gas station parking lot, the tires screeching against the pavement. Chase jumped out of the driver's seat. A moment later, Megan's small sedan pulled in right behind him. She must have followed him from the dealership. That brought us to the current moment. The officer stood between me and my son, the handcuffs dangling from his belt. The small black square of a body cam was mounted to the center of the officer's uniform. A tiny red light blinked, recording every word. He stole my car, officer, Chase repeated, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. I want him arrested right now. Megan walked up slowly, stopping a few feet away. She did not interrupt. She simply watched the red light of the body cam. The officer looked at Chase. Sir, you are stating for the record that this is your personal vehicle? Yes, Chase said without hesitation. I bought it. I financed it. I am the sole owner. He took the keys off my desk. It is grand theft. The officer turned back to me. Sir, do you have the registration for this vehicle? It is in the glove compartment, I said quietly. The officer walked to the open door of the Porsche, leaned inside, and retrieved the small leather pouch. He pulled out the state registration paper. He read it in silence for a few seconds. Then, he looked up at Chase. Sir, this vehicle is not registered to you, the officer said, his tone shifting from authoritative to annoyed. It is registered to Carter Heritage Motors, Incorporated. Chase waved his hand dismissively. That is my family's company. I am the president and chief operating officer. So basically, it is my car. Basically is not a legal term in the state of Texas, the officer said. He pulled another folded piece of paper from the pouch. This is a corporate fleet authorization form. It lists Robert Carter as the primary authorized driver of this specific vehicle. Are you Robert Carter? The officer looked directly at me. I am, I replied. The officer sighed, closing the leather pouch and handing it back to me. He turned to Chase, his expression hardening. Let me make this perfectly clear to you. This is a corporate asset. This man is authorized to drive it. You cannot use the police department to settle internal family business disputes. Filing a false police report is a crime. Chase opened his mouth to argue, but the officer held up a hand. If I have to come out here again because you two cannot share a company car, someone is leaving in the back of my cruiser, and it will not be him, the officer said, pointing at me. Do we understand each other? Chase swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the body cam, then to the registration in my hand. The car has to be back on the lot by 8 in the morning, he muttered, sounding more desperate than angry. Just tell him to bring it back. Take it up with your human resources department, the officer said. He walked back to his cruiser, turned off the flashing lights, and drove away. The gas station fell silent, save for the hum of the pumps. Chase stood there, humiliated. His false accusation dismantled in less than 5 minutes. He looked at me, then at Megan. Before turning around and marching back to his SUV, he drove off without another word. I let out a long breath, leaning heavily against the car door. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. I looked at Megan. She was not celebrating. She was staring at the exact spot where Chase's SUV had just been. He called 911, Megan said, her voice barely above a whisper. He risked putting you in handcuffs. He lost his temper, I said, trying to find some logical explanation. He has always been possessive of the demonstrator fleet. Megan shook her head. No, Dad. You are not listening. When he called the police from the showroom, I was standing right next to him. The dispatcher asked for the vehicle identification number to put out the alert. She walked closer, her eyes locking onto mine. Chase recited the last 6 digits of the VIN from memory, without looking at a single piece of paper. He rattled them off like his own social security number. I frowned, looking down at the silver hood of the car. He is the operations officer. He knows the inventory. Nobody memorizes a random demonstrator VIN, Megan said firmly. And nobody calls the police on their own father just because of bruised ego. He said the car has to be back before 8 o'clock tomorrow morning for an inspection. He mentioned a scheduled audit, I offered, though the excuse sounded flimsy even to my own ears. If it is a standard audit, a missing demonstrator just gets logged as out on loan, Megan explained, the sharp analytical tone of a financial controller slipping back into her voice. You provide the fleet authorization, and the auditor moves on. The only reason a specific car absolutely must be physically present on the lot is if the auditor is verifying collateral for a floor plan loan. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The floor plan financing was the lifeblood of our dealership. We borrowed money from Gulf Horizon Bank to buy inventory. When a car sold, we paid the bank back. Every vehicle was tracked by its specific VIN. If a car was missing during an audit and the loan had not been paid, the bank considered it a massive breach of contract. Drive the car to your house, Megan said, stepping back toward her sedan. Do not take it back to the dealership. I am coming over. 30 minutes later, we sat at the large oak dining table in my house. The silence of the empty house felt suffocating. My wife had passed away 5 years ago. And without her, this house was just a collection of quiet rooms. I went to the hall closet and pulled out a heavy cardboard box. It was covered in a thin layer of dust. When Chase had demanded Megan's termination 18 months ago, I had ordered her office packed up by security. I could not bear to throw the box away, but I also could not bring myself to give it to her. It had sat in the closet, a physical reminder of my greatest failure as a father. I carried the box into the dining room and set it on the table. Megan looked at it, her expression unreadable. I am sorry, I said, my voice thick with regret. I should have given this back to you a long time ago. Megan did not ask for an apology. She simply reached into the box and began pulling out the items. A framed photo of her college graduation, a coffee mug, a stack of old industry magazines, and at the very bottom, a thick green folder. I recognized it immediately. It was the green exception folder. 18 months ago, Chase had stood in our boardroom waving that exact folder in the air. He had used it to prove that Megan was losing control of the accounting system, that she was making millions of dollars in inventory errors. It was the evidence I had used to justify signing her termination papers. Megan opened the folder, spreading the pages out across the oak table. When Chase blamed me for the errors, I told you I had already documented the anomalies. I told you I had printed the exception reports before the system locked me out. She flipped past several pages of complex spreadsheets, her finger tracing the rows of data. I was tracking vehicles that showed unusual movement in the system. Cars that were marked as sold, but still carried active loan balances. Cars that were mysteriously transferred between the main lot and the storage facility right before bank inspections. She stopped on a page near the back. She slid the paper across the table toward me. There were 3 specific vehicle identification numbers circled in bright red ink. Next to them, Megan had written a note in her own handwriting. Possible duplicate collateral. Do not clear without lender confirmation. Look at the 3rd number, Dad, Megan said, her voice steady and quiet. I picked up the paper. My eyes scanned the long string of letters and numbers. The last 4 digits were 7419. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the registration for the silver Porsche, parked in my driveway. I laid it on the table next to the green folder. The numbers matched perfectly. 7419. The silence in the dining room stretched out, heavy and absolute. The pieces of the puzzle began to snap together with terrifying clarity. Chase did not care about the car because of his ego. He cared because the physical car had to be present to prove to a bank that the asset still existed. And he had memorized the VIN because he had been actively monitoring this specific vehicle for a very long time. Megan leaned forward, resting her hands on the edge of the table. The hurt of the past 18 months was gone, replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a woman who had just found the loose thread in a massive lie. Dad, she said, tapping her finger against the red ink on the paper. This car was already wrong before you fired me. I looked at the date printed at the top corner of the exception report. Then I remembered the date I had signed her termination papers. I had fired my daughter exactly 1 day after she flagged this vehicle for fraud. The green folder lay open on the oak dining table. Megan did not look at me. Her hands moved with a quiet, terrifying precision, separating the thick stack of printed exception reports into 3 distinct piles. She smoothed the edges of the papers, her eyes scanning the columns of numbers and vehicle identification codes. Outside, the Texas heat baked the driveway where the silver Porsche sat. But inside the house, the air felt entirely frozen. I watched my daughter work. For 18 months, I had convinced myself that firing her was a tragic business necessity. Chase had presented the evidence. Nolan Price, our outsourced chief financial officer, had confirmed the data trail. I had chosen to protect the legacy of Carter Heritage Motors. believing Megan had simply crumbled under the pressure of managing a $90 million floor plan. Now, watching her meticulously organize the timeline, the foundation of that belief began to crack. Megan tapped her index finger against the first pile. "These are the reports generated before my system credentials were revoked," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. She shifted her hand to the middle stack. "This is the day of my termination, and this final pile represents the audit records from the weeks following my departure." She did not ask for my opinion. She simply laid the architecture of her own professional execution bare on the table. She pulled a printed email from the first pile and slid it across the polished oak. "I sent this to you and Chase 3 days before the board meeting," Megan said. Subject line: duplicate collateral risk on Highline inventory. "Did you open the attachment, Dad?" I looked at the piece of paper. The printed text blurred slightly. My throat felt incredibly tight. I remembered receiving the email on a Tuesday morning. I remembered Chase walking into my office 5 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a confident smile. "I remember seeing the notification," I said slowly, the shame burning hot in my chest. "But Chase told me it was just another one of your panic reports. He said you were getting bogged down in software glitches and that he had already spoken to Nolan to clear the errors. He offered to summarize it for me so I could focus on the acquisition talks." Megan closed her eyes for a brief second. A muscle feathered in her jaw. "He summarized it." "Of course he did. He told you I was incompetent. And you took his word for it because reading a 50-page collateral report was too much trouble." "I trusted him," I said. It sounded like the weakest excuse in the world. "You trusted the path of least resistance," Megan corrected, opening her eyes and staring directly at me. "Because looking closely might have meant admitting your chosen successor was breaking the rules." The truth of her words hit me like a physical blow. The memory of the day I fired her rushed back, vivid and sickening. We were in the main executive boardroom. The long mahogany table gleamed under the recessed lighting. Chase stood at the head of the room, projecting a slide deck onto the screen. Nolan Price sat near the corner, wiping sweat from his forehead with a crumpled tissue, his eyes darting everywhere except toward Megan. Chase had pointed a laser pointer at the screen, highlighting 3 missing vehicles. "The inventory is severely compromised," he had told the board. "These cars are marked as sold, but the capital has not been returned to Gulf Horizon Bank. We are looking at a massive sold out of trust violation. And the system logs show that the financial controller's account manually bypassed the warning flags." Megan had stood up, her chair scraping loudly. She had looked at Nolan, demanding the full audit log. "You know those overrides did not come from my terminal, Nolan. Show the board the IP addresses. Show them the timestamps." I had raised my hand, cutting her off. I remembered the panic in my own chest, the absolute fear that the bank would pull our credit line if this dispute spilled out into the open. "That is enough, Megan," I had said. "The data is right there on the screen. The bank is going to audit us next month, and we cannot afford to have a controller who blames the software for missing capital." I had slid the termination agreement across the mahogany table. I had handed her my own silver pen. She had looked at the pen, then up at my face. "Did you even read my email?" she had asked, her voice cracking for the first and only time. I had not answered her. I had just waited for her to sign. Sitting at my dining table 18 months later, the silence stretched out between us. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling slightly. "I am sorry," I whispered. "I let him manage the narrative. I wanted the problem to go away, and I sacrificed you to make it happen." Megan did not offer forgiveness. She reached for her cell phone. "Apologies do not fix the ledger, Dad. We need to prove who actually altered these records." She dialed a number and put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before a woman answered. It was Dana Whitaker, our outside corporate counsel. Dana was a sharp, pragmatic attorney who did not care about family dynamics. She cared about liability. "Megan," Dana's voice came through the small speaker. "I assume this is not a social call on a Sunday afternoon." "I am sitting here with Dad," Megan said. We have reason to believe the inventory errors that led to my termination were deliberately fabricated to mask a duplicate financing scheme. I need to contact the software vendor and request the access termination log for my old account. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. If you try to log into the current system without authorization, Chase can hit you with a cyber intrusion claim, Dana warned. He already sent a company-wide memo reminding everyone that your credentials were revoked. I am not touching the current system, Megan replied, her tone clinical. I am not touching the current system, Megan replied, her tone clinical. I can consent to the release of records tied specifically to my former user account, and Dad can authorize a limited company request for the administrative certificate, showing when that account was disabled. Send the vendor a preservation notice. Ask for the archive deactivation record only. We do not need access to the live ledger. Dana was silent for a moment. That is a much narrower request, she said. The vendor's licensing portal can generate a certified account status record if the former user consents and the current chairman signs the company authorization. Anything beyond that will require lender involvement or formal legal process. Send the forms, Megan said. Dana emailed them within minutes. Megan signed the consent from her phone. I signed the limited corporate authorization, expressly restricting the request to the date and time her credentials had been disabled. The record did not arrive because some employee decided to answer us on a Sunday. It came from the vendor's automated compliance portal, carrying a certificate number and a digital verification code. Megan placed the document beside the green folder. Now we know exactly when my access ended, she said. Nothing more. But it gives us a clean starting point. I need you to send the formal legal request to the vendor right now. I will draft it, Dana said. But do not expect a smoking gun. A timestamp just proves when you left. It does not prove who drove the getaway car. Just get the log, Dana, Megan said, ending the call. We waited for 2 hours. I paced the length of the living room, staring out the window at the silver Porsche. Chase had been terrified of losing that car. He had called the police over a demonstrator model. The pieces were shifting, forming a picture I was terrified to look at. When Megan's phone finally chimed with an email notification, she opened the attachment from the software vendor. She placed the phone on the table next to the green folder. Look at the timestamp, Megan instructed. I leaned over. The vendor's automated log showed that Megan's credentials had been globally disabled at 2:14 in the afternoon on the day of the board meeting. Exactly 10 minutes after she walked out of the building, Megan picked up the third stack of exception reports, the ones from the weeks after she left. She pointed to the critical alterations on the 3 circled vehicles. The overrides that cleared the warning flags on these vehicles occurred 3 weeks after I was locked out, Megan said, tapping the dates. Someone went into the system, long after I was gone, and manually hid the fact that these cars were sitting on a duplicate loan schedule. They used the narrative of my incompetence to justify the initial confusion, and then they quietly buried the evidence. The story Chase had sold to the board was dead. Megan could not have fixed the errors to cover her tracks, because her digital hands had been tied long before the changes were made. If Chase orchestrated this, he did not do it alone, I said. A cold realization settling over me. He does not have the technical skill to manipulate the ledger like that. Nolan Price manages the interface. Nolan is a symptom, Megan said, gathering the papers. Chase is the disease. But Nolan would not take that kind of risk without a massive incentive. We need to see what Chase has been hiding in your own office. I led her down the hallway to my private study. The room smelled of old leather and the faint trace of the cigars I used to smoke. In the corner sat a heavy steel safe where I kept personal documents, legacy contracts, and correspondence that bypassed the main corporate mailroom. I spun the dial, the mechanical clicks loud in the quiet room. I pulled the heavy door open and began pulling out stacks of thick envelopes. Chase handles the daily mail distribution, I explained, sorting through the files. But anything flagged for the chairman's personal review gets placed in this safe by my assistant. I only check it once a week. Megan started opening the unsealed envelopes, her eyes scanning the letterheads. She stopped at a heavy cream-colored paper bearing the logo of Gulf Horizon Bank. "This is a default warning," Megan said, her brow furrowing. "It is addressed to the office of the Chief Operating Officer, but they carbon copied you because it involves the master credit facility." The bank flagged several sold units that had not been paid off within the required 48-hour window. "I never saw that," I said, reaching for the paper. Megan pulled out a second piece of paper, a printout of an email reply attached to the warning. "Chase replied to the bank on your behalf. He stated that the vehicles were not sold, but simply moved to an off-site promotional event, which exempts them from immediate payoff." She pointed to the bottom of the email. There, glowing in black ink, was a digital copy of my signature. I stared at my own name. I did not authorize that signature. I have not approved an off-site promotional exemption in over a year. "He used your digital stamp," Megan said, her voice tight. "He bypassed the bank's panic triggers by making it look like the chairman was personally guaranteeing the location of the inventory." She did not yell. She did not throw the paper. She just pulled a yellow highlighter from the desk drawer and carefully marked the fraudulent signature. She was building a chain of custody, linking Chase to a deliberate effort to deceive our primary lender. "If he claims the cars were at a promotional event, how did he hide their absence during the physical lot inspections?" I asked, trying to keep up with the mechanics of the fraud. Megan looked up. "That is a logistics problem, which means we need to talk to the service director." Elena Ruiz was a woman who did not suffer fools. At 42, she ran the entire service and transport department of Carter Heritage Motors with an iron grip. She was also the designated representative for the Employee Ownership Trust, holding a 10% voting block on the board of directors. A block that Chase and I had consistently marginalized by voting together. We met her at a small diner 3 miles away from the dealership. The smell of fried bacon and strong coffee hung heavily in the air. We sat in a corner booth, away from the windows, to avoid any employees who might recognize us. Elena slid into the booth, crossing her arms over her uniform shirt. She looked at me, then at Megan. "Chase sent out an emergency alert to all managers an hour ago. He said Robert has taken a temporary leave of absence for health reasons, and that anyone speaking to Megan will face immediate disciplinary action." My jaw tightened. Chase was moving fast, using his executive authority to build a wall around the company. "Are you going to report us, Elena?" Megan asked, her tone entirely serious. Elena let out a short, bitter laugh. "I represent the employees, Megan. The people who actually turn the wrenches and wash the cars. Chase has been walking around for months talking about cutting benefits to save the legacy. If you have a way to stop him from selling us out to Red Mesa, I am listening." Megan leaned across the sticky diner table. "I need to know about the gate scanners. When I was controller, I instituted a strict policy that every vehicle moving through the main gates had to trigger the radio frequency scanner to create a timestamp. Did Chase disable that system?" Elena shook her head. "He could not disable it without alerting the vendor. But he found a workaround. For the past 6 months, he has been ordering the night shift security guards to manually open the side gates after hours. He claimed the windshield tags were malfunctioning and causing traffic backups. So cars are leaving the lot without a digital footprint," I said, understanding the implication. "They leave," Elena confirmed, lowering her voice. "And they come back. Usually the night before Gulf Horizon sends their field auditors. I have seen the transport trucks moving inventory between the North Dallas lot and the Plano warehouse at 2 in the morning. If he is moving cars manually, the main scanner log will not show the movement," Megan said, tapping her finger against her coffee cup. "But what about the archive? The maintenance exports?" Elena smiled for the first time. It was a sharp, dangerous expression. "The system generates a weekly export for the service department to track hardware degradation. It bypasses the financial servers completely. It drops straight into my private department mailbox. Chase does not even know it exists. Can you get me those exports?" Megan asked. "I can," Elena said, But you have to promise me something, Robert. She turned her gaze to me, her dark eyes completely unforgiving. My seat on the board has been decorative since the day your wife passed away. You and Chase outvote me on everything. If I help you blow this open, and we find out Chase is taking a secret payout from Red Mesa, I will use the employee trust veto to kill the sale, and you will not stand in my way. Under our corporate bylaws, the employee trust held a specific power. They could veto any related party transaction if a company officer stood to receive an undisclosed personal benefit. It was a failsafe my wife had insisted upon years ago, a rule I had forgotten because we had never faced a betrayal from within. You have my word, I said, meaning it entirely. Elena nodded, sliding out of the booth. I will pull the archives tonight. Megan and I drove back to my house in silence. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, casting long, dark shadows across the suburban streets. We had pieces of the puzzle, a modified access log, a forged signature, and a method for moving cars in the dark. But we still did not know why the silver Porsche had triggered Chase's absolute panic. When we walked through the front door, I noticed a small stack of mail sitting on the console table in the foyer. My neighbor usually brought it up to the porch on Sundays. I sifted through the envelopes, mostly advertisements and utility bills, but one envelope stood out. It was forwarded from a commercial processing center, addressed to Robert Carter, chairman. The return address belonged to a company I had never heard of. Pinnacle Capital Floor Plan. Beneath my name, the recipient line read, Care of Carter Select Leasing, Limited Liability Company. I stared at the envelope. Megan, I called out, my voice sounding hollow. She walked into the foyer, took the envelope from my hand, and ripped it open. She pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. It was a notice of collateral verification. Carter Select Leasing. Megan read aloud, her eyes darting across the page. This is an affiliate company, but we do not have an affiliate company by that name. She flipped to the second page, scanning the dense blocks of text. She stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. She placed the document flat on the console table and pointed to a specific line in the collateral schedule. There, listed as the primary asset securing a massive short-term loan, was a vehicle description, silver Porsche demonstrator, and next to it, printed in bold black ink, was a vehicle identification number ending in 7419. The room seemed to tilt. The exact same car, the exact same string of numbers, sitting on a document from a completely different bank. This car is on 2 stories, Megan whispered, stepping back from the table. Gulf Horizon thinks they own the loan. Pinnacle Capital thinks they own the loan. He used the same asset twice. That is federal bank fraud, I said, my chest tightening. If they find out, they will freeze our entire operating account. The company will be dead in a week. Megan flipped to the final page of the document, looking for a signature or a contact name. She found it at the bottom left corner. Designated managing member, Nolan Price. Nolan. The outsourced financial officer who had sat in the boardroom and confirmed Megan's supposed errors. The man who managed the software interface. Nolan registered the company, Megan said, pulling out her phone. Her fingers flew across the screen as she accessed the State Public Business Registry. I am pulling the incorporation documents for Carter Select Leasing. We waited for the web page to load, the silence in the hallway heavy with anticipation. The state registry page appeared on the small screen. Registered agent is Nolan Price, Megan read, her eyes narrowing. Date of incorporation. Exactly 1 week after I was fired. The timing was immaculate. They had pushed her out, disabled her access, and immediately built a shadow company to double dip into the financing lines. Does Chase have his name on the filing? I asked, leaning closer to the phone. No, Megan said, her voice dropping to a whisper. But look at the mailing address for the limited liability company. I looked at the address listed under Nolan's name. It was a post office box located in downtown Dallas. I recognized it instantly. I had sent birthday cards and personal legal documents to that exact address for years. It was the private post office box Chase used for his personal investments. Megan looked up from the screen, the blue light reflecting in her eyes. Nolan is holding the pen, Dad. But Chase is directing the ink. You cannot just seize a company using a post office box. Dana Whitaker's voice sounded flat and metallic through the speaker of Megan's cell phone. Megan leaned over my oak dining table, staring at the corporate registry page glowing on her laptop screen. The sharp click of her fingernail against the trackpad echoed in the quiet room. Outside, the early morning Texas sun was already starting to bake the driveway, but inside the house, the air conditioning hummed a steady, cold rhythm. The limited liability company is registered to Nolan Price, Megan said, her eyes tracking a line of data on the screen. But the mailing address belongs to a private box rented by Chase. We have the duplicate collateral schedule from Pinnacle Capital. We know the money was pulled using the same vehicle identification numbers. The connection is right here. A connection is not a conviction, the attorney replied, the rustle of paper audible through the line. Anyone can rent a post office box. Nolan could claim he used Chase's mailing address for convenience. Unless you have a document showing your brother holds a beneficial ownership stake in Carter Select Leasing, you cannot prove he authorized the duplicate loan. If you walk into a boardroom with a matching zip code and accuse the chief operating officer of federal bank fraud, he will crush you with a defamation lawsuit before lunch. Megan closed her eyes, taking a slow, measured breath. I watched my daughter carefully. For 18 months, she had carried the weight of a failure that did not belong to her. Now, holding the proof of her innocence, she was being told it was not enough. We need clean evidence, Megan said, opening her eyes. Something that bypasses Nolan completely. You need an internal digital footprint, Dana corrected, or a witness who is willing to go on the record. Until then, you do not approach the lender, and you do not accuse your son. Build the timeline, Megan. Do not jump to the end. The call disconnected, leaving a heavy silence in the dining room. Megan pushed the phone away and pulled a yellow legal pad to the center of the table. She began drawing small circles, writing names inside them. Carter Heritage Motors, Carter Select Leasing, Red Mesa Automotive Partners, Gulf Horizon Bank. She was mapping a machine designed to bleed my life's work dry, and my own son was sitting at the controls. Before I could say anything, the heavy thud of a car door closing drifted through the front window. I turned and looked through the slatted blinds. Chase's black sport utility vehicle was parked directly behind the silver Porsche in my driveway. A moment later, the front door lock clicked. Chase still had a key to my house. He walked into the foyer, wearing a crisp navy polo shirt and a practiced look of deep concern. In his left hand, he carried a thick leather binder stamped with the Red Mesa corporate logo. He stopped in the archway of the dining room, his eyes scanning the yellow notepad, the printed exception reports, and finally, settling on Megan. The practiced concern on his face hardened for a fraction of a second, but he quickly smoothed it away. I thought you would be alone, Dad, Chase said, stepping into the room and setting the heavy binder on the edge of the table. We need to talk about the acquisition offer. The capital situation has deteriorated overnight. I felt the muscles in my neck tighten. Less than 24 hours ago, this man had stood in a gas station parking lot and demanded my arrest. Now, he was walking into my home, presenting himself as the savior of the family legacy. We agreed to discuss business on Monday, I said, keeping my voice entirely level. Chase pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I know what we agreed. And I know I lost my temper yesterday. I am sorry about the police, Dad. Truly, I was stressed, and I panicked when you drove off with the collateral. Gulf Horizon is threatening to call our entire floor plan line in 48 hours. If they freeze our accounts, 300 families will not get their paychecks on Friday. He sounded entirely reasonable. That was the most dangerous thing about my son. He knew exactly how to weaponize my sense of responsibility. He knew I valued the employees, the people who swept the service bays and ran the finance desks. Chase turned his gaze to Megan. I know you are trying to help, Megan. But pulling old exception reports is not going to magically generate cash. You are confusing him. You are making him second-guess the only lifeline we have left. Megan did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply leaned back in her chair and looked at the heavy leather binder. Is that what Red Mesa is? A lifeline? They are willing to absorb our debt, Chase said, tapping the leather cover. They will keep the staff employed. But they need an exclusivity signature by noon tomorrow, or they pull the offer. I brought the finalized proposal for you to read, Dad. Please, look at the numbers. Stop letting her drag you backward into mistakes we already fixed. I looked at the binder. Then I looked at the document sitting just beneath Megan's legal pad. The Pinnacle Capital Notice. The proof that the crisis Chase was trying to solve was a crisis he had manufactured. A deep, cold anger settled into my chest. I wanted to throw the loan document in his face. I wanted to demand the truth. But I remembered Dana's warning. A matching zip code was not enough. Leave the binder, I said, standing up from the table. I will read it today. We will convene the board tomorrow morning. Chase stood up, looking relieved. He thought he had won. He buttoned his jacket, offered a tight smile, and walked out the front door. The moment his engine faded down the street, Megan reached for the leather binder and pulled it toward her. He is rushing the timeline, Megan noted, flipping the heavy cover open. He needs you to sign away the company before the Gulf Horizon field auditors arrive and find the missing collateral. Then we need to know exactly how he is hiding the cars, I said. Call Elena. 2 hours later, we parked my personal sedan at the edge of a municipal park, 3 miles away from the dealership. The midday heat was punishing, the cicadas buzzing loudly in the oak trees. Elena Ruiz, our service director, sat on a wooden bench in the shade, wearing dark sunglasses and her gray corporate uniform shirt. As the representative for the Employee Ownership Trust, Elena held a 10% voting block on the board of directors. For years, her seat had been mostly ceremonial, drowned out by the combined voting power Chase and I held. Now she was the only person inside the building who could see the physical movement of the inventory. Megan sat on the bench next to her. I stood a few feet away, watching the sparse traffic on the road. Chase sent a priority email to all department heads this morning, Elena said, not bothering with a greeting. He claimed the bank is demanding an emergency operational audit, and that any manager who shares internal data with unauthorized personnel will be terminated for violating corporate confidentiality. He is building a wall, Megan said. He wants to make sure I cannot access the gate scanner logs. Elena let out a short, cynical laugh. He does not care about the digital logs, Megan. He cares about the physical gates. For the past 4 months, Chase has been ordering the night shift security team to manually open the transport gates after midnight. He claims the radio frequency tags on the windshields are malfunctioning and causing the gates to jam. I stepped closer to the bench. Why would he need the gates open at midnight? Because that is when the flatbed trucks arrive, Elena explained, lowering her voice as a jogger passed by on the concrete path. I came in early last Tuesday to prep the service bays. It was 4 in the morning. I saw 2 heavy transport trucks backing out of the main lot. They were loaded with highline inventory. Porsches, mostly. They were headed toward our overflow warehouse in Plano. Right before the physical inventory check, Megan said, the pieces snapping together. Exactly. Elena confirmed. The trucks move the cars to the warehouse. The bank auditors count the inventory at the main lot on Wednesday. Then, on Thursday, a different lender sends an auditor to the Plano warehouse, and they count the exact same cars for a different loan schedule. But because the main gates were opened manually, there is no digital timestamp showing the cars ever left the primary facility. It is a shell game, I muttered, feeling sick to my stomach. He is hiding empty spaces. Megan shook her head. A manual gate opening still creates a security exception report, and the bank auditors check the windshield tags with a handheld radio frequency scanner. Even if the cars are moved, the tags have to match the facility location in the system. Chase cannot just move a car without the software noticing Elena reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. She held it out to Megan. "You built the accounting software, Megan, but you did not build the maintenance hardware," Elena said. "The gate scanner company requires a weekly data export to monitor sensor degradation. That export bypasses the financial servers entirely. It drops into a private mailbox managed by the service department. I am legally authorized to download it for hardware review." Megan took the flash drive, her fingers closing tightly around the metal casing. "What you find on there is your problem," Elena said, standing up from the bench. "But you better find something solid. If Chase forces a sale to Red Mesa, he promised to cut our benefits by 20% to make the balance sheet look better for the buyers. The employees will not survive a hostile takeover disguised as a rescue." Elena walked away across the dry grass, leaving us in the heavy summer heat. When we returned to the house, Megan immediately plugged the flash drive into her laptop. The screen flickered, loading a massive spreadsheet filled with thousands of rows of raw data. It was a chaotic mess of timestamps, sensor identification codes, and location markers. "This is every time a radio frequency tag pinged a scanner at any of our facilities over the last 6 months, Megan explained, her eyes darting across the screen. "I need to filter it down to the silver Porsche. I need to find tag number 7419. She typed the sequence into the search bar and hit enter. The thousands of rows vanished, replaced by a condensed list of specific movements. Megan stared at the screen, her brow furrowing. She leaned closer, tracing a line of data with her finger. Then she looked at the next line. "This does not make any sense," she murmured. "What is it?" I asked, standing behind her chair. Megan pointed to a row of data from 2 weeks ago. "Look at this timestamp. The Porsche's tag pinged the scanner at the main Dallas showroom at 7:14 in the morning." She moved her finger down to the very next line, and the exact same tag pinged the scanner at the Plano warehouse at 7:17 in the morning. I did the math in my head. The Plano warehouse is 20 miles away. A car cannot travel 20 miles in 3 minutes. "Exactly," Megan said, her voice tightening with realization. "A car cannot, but a clone tag can." She turned in her chair, looking up at me. "He is not just moving the cars, Dad. He is copying the radio frequency chips. He is not leaving the duplicate tag on a desk," Megan said. "These windshield tags are passive. A reader has to energize them at close range. Chase cloned the Porsche tag and attached the duplicate to a lower-value demonstrator that remained in Dallas. That decoy vehicle crossed the Dallas gate at 7:14. 3 minutes later, the real Porsche crossed the reader inside the Plano warehouse. One identification number appeared in 2 locations because 2 physical tags were carrying the same code. She enlarged the 2 entries on the screen. The car did not travel 20 miles in 3 minutes. The duplicate tag did. He used one ordinary vehicle in Dallas to create a false location record, while the real collateral was being shown to the second lender in Plano. The system thinks the car is in 2 places at once. The sheer audacity of the scheme left me speechless. Chase was manipulating physical hardware to deceive 2 independent financial institutions. It was a felony on a massive scale. "Does the log show who authorized the creation of the clone tags?" I asked, desperate for a name we could hand to the authorities. Megan highlighted the administrative column on the spreadsheet. A generic user code appeared next to every cloning event. It was authorized under a master administrative credential, a credential available to you, me, Chase, and Nolan. The pattern proves fraud, but the login is anonymous. We still do not have a direct link proving Chase ordered it. I looked over at the dining table, where the thick leather binder from Red Mesa sat like a bomb waiting to detonate. If he is risking federal prison to double-finance the inventory, where is the money going? I asked. He said the company is bleeding cash, but the service department is full. We are selling cars. The cash crisis is artificial. Megan stood up and walked over to the binder. She opened the heavy leather cover and began reading the executive summary. Her eyes scanned the dense corporate language, the promises of market stabilization and aggressive restructuring. She stopped reading and placed her finger on a specific paragraph near the bottom of the page. Listen to this sentence, Megan said, reading aloud. Red Mesa Automotive Partners will ensure strategic market alignment through managed liquidity reduction, maximizing shareholder exit value while preserving operational continuity. She looked at me, her expression completely blank. Strategic market alignment through managed liquidity reduction. It sounds like standard acquisition jargon, I said. It is, Megan agreed. But it is also the exact phrase Chase used in an internal strategy memo he sent to Nolan 4 months ago. I remember reading it before my access was cut. Nobody talks like that naturally, Dad. It is a highly specific phrasing. She picked up the binder, examining the printed pages. If Chase wrote parts of this proposal, he did not just receive a predatory offer from a competitor. He actively helped draft the document that is about to buy your company for pennies on the dollar. Can you prove he wrote it? I asked, the betrayal tasting like ash in my mouth. Not from a piece of paper, Megan said. Did Chase email you a digital copy of this proposal before he brought the binder over? I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and opened my email application. He sent a digital draft last Thursday. He said he wanted me to have time to review the terms. Forward that email to Dana, Megan instructed, her voice urgent. Tell her forensic team to extract the metadata from the original document attachment. The metadata will show the creation date, the original author, and the file path of the computer where the document was generated. I forwarded the email instantly, my thumb pressing the screen with far more force than necessary. We waited. The afternoon sun stretched long, dark shadows across the dining room floor. The silence in the house was absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. I had spent my entire adult life building Carter Heritage Motors. I had swept the floors of the first lot. I had shaken hands with thousands of customers. And now, I was waiting for a computer file to tell me if my own son had engineered its destruction. Suddenly, my cell phone vibrated violently against the wooden table. It was not a text from Dana. It was an automated corporate email alert, sent to the entire company directory. The sender was listed as the Office of the Chief Operating Officer. I opened the email. The bright white screen glared in my hand. To all Carter Heritage Motors employees. Effective immediately, Chairman Robert Carter has taken a temporary medical leave of absence to address stress-related health concerns. The recent liquidity crisis has placed an enormous burden on his shoulders, and we ask that you respect his privacy during this time. Furthermore, please be advised that former employee Megan Carter is strictly prohibited from entering any company facility. Her previous inventory management errors continue to require intensive auditing, and any staff member found sharing proprietary information with her will face immediate termination and potential legal action. We are finalizing a strategic partnership to secure your jobs and protect our legacy. Focus on the customers. I will handle the rest. Sincerely, Chase Carter, President. I read the words twice, my vision blurring at the edges. He had not just locked us out of the building. He had assassinated my competence and Megan's character in front of 300 people. He was isolating us, ensuring that if we tried to speak, we would sound like a bitter, erratic old man and a disgruntled former employee. A surge of pure, blinding fury rushed through my veins. I grabbed my car keys off the console table. I am going down there, I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had never felt before. I am walking into that showroom, and I am firing him in front of the entire sales floor. Megan stepped directly in front of me, blocking the archway to the front door. Move, Megan, I warned. No, she said, her voice sharp and commanding. Think about what you are doing. If you drive down there screaming, you prove his email right. You become the unstable, stressed old man, having a public breakdown. He will call security. He will have you escorted out of your own building, and Howard Bell will use the spectacle to strip your voting rights at the emergency board meeting tomorrow. He just stole my company, I shouted, pointing at the phone in my hand. He told our people I am losing my mind. He is trying to make you act like it, Megan shot back, standing her ground. He wants you to react with emotion because he holds the physical power right now. You cannot fight him with anger, Dad. You have to fight him with the system. I stared at my daughter, my chest heaving. She was right. The impulsive, emotional reaction was exactly what Chase was counting on. I slowly lowered my hand, the keys jingling quietly in the quiet room. Before I could apologize, Megan's phone chimed with an incoming message. She picked it up, her eyes scanning the screen. The tension in her shoulders suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, absolute stillness. Dana's team stripped the metadata, Megan said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I stepped back to the table. What does it say? Megan turned the phone around so I could see the forensic report. The screen displayed a block of technical data extracted from the Red Mesa proposal file. File created February 14th. Original author, C. Carter. Device, Chem, exec, laptop, 02. I stared at the date, February 14th. 4 full months before the liquidity crisis supposedly forced us to seek a buyer. Chase had not found Red Mesa to save us from drowning. He had built the anchor before he ever pushed us into the water. But Megan was not looking at the date. She was pointing to the bottom line of the metadata report, where the forensic software had captured the original root folder path from Chase's computer. File path. C. Users. C. Carter. Documents. Project Crown. Management rollover. Project Crown, Megan read aloud, the words hanging heavy in the cold air. He did not just write the offer to sell the company, Dad. Look at the subfolder. Management rollover. In corporate finance, a rollover meant the acquiring company was allowing a member of the current management team to roll their existing equity into the new ownership structure. It was a secret payout. He is not saving the company, I said. The final piece of the devastating truth falling into place. He is selling it to himself. Megan looked at the heavy leather binder sitting on the table, then up at me. And tomorrow morning, he is going to ask the board of directors to hand him the crown. Dana Whitaker's downtown law office smelled intensely of lemonwood polish and cold, circulating air. The heavy mahogany conference table sat in the center of the room like a physical barrier. Nolan Price sat on the far side of that barrier, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles were completely white. A small bead of sweat formed near his left temple, catching the harsh fluorescent light before sliding down toward his collar. I am only here as a professional courtesy, Nolan said, his voice carrying a slight tremor. He adjusted his glasses, refusing to look at me, and because my counsel advised me that ignoring a shareholder inquiry might look uncooperative. But I have a dealership to run, so I would appreciate brevity. His attorney, a sharp-looking man named Vance, sat quietly next to him with an open notepad. Megan sat beside me. She did not wear a suit. She wore the same simple gray sweater she had worn to brunch on Father's Day, but her posture was entirely different. She looked like a predator who had just cornered her meal. We can be very brief, Nolan, Megan said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the polished wood. Let us talk about Carter Select Leasing. Nolan looked at the paper. It was the incorporation document we had pulled from the public registry. He let out a rehearsed, dismissive sigh. That is a standard leasing affiliate. We set it up to handle secondary financing options for clients with challenging credit. It is a completely normal corporate structure. A normal corporate structure registered exactly 7 days after you helped my brother convince this family to terminate my employment, Megan replied, her tone perfectly even. A company where you are listed as the designated managing member, yet the primary mailing address belongs to a private post office box controlled by Chase. Vance placed his hand flat on the table, leaning forward. My client is an outsourced financial officer. Using an executive's preferred mailing address for administrative efficiency is not a crime, Miss Carter. If you called this meeting to throw wild conspiracy theories at a dedicated employee, we are leaving. Megan did not argue with the lawyer. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a second piece of paper. This one was covered in blocks of technical text and highlighted data paths. Administrative efficiency does not explain this, Megan said, placing the forensic report next to the incorporation document. This is the metadata extracted from the Red Mesa Automotive Partners acquisition proposal. The document my brother presented to the board yesterday. It shows the file was originally authored 4 months ago on an executive laptop and saved in a root folder titled Project Crown. Nolan stared at the forensic report. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving his skin a pale, sickly gray. The subfolder is titled Management Rollover, Megan continued, her eyes locking onto Nolan's panicked face. That means Chase is securing a personal equity stake in the new company after he forces our father to sell. But he needed a crisis to force the sale. He needed the company to bleed cash. And you, Nolan, are the man who manages the digital bleeding. Do not answer that, Vance snapped, looking at his client. But Nolan was already unraveling. The polished armor of a corporate executive shattered, revealing a terrified man sitting in a cold room. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. I did not design the takeover, Nolan blurted out, his voice cracking. I was just trying to buy us time. Nolan, stop talking, Vance ordered, his voice rising in volume. Nolan ignored his lawyer. He looked directly at me, his eyes wide and pleading. Robert, you have to understand. The cash flow was drying up. We were missing payroll targets. I made some manual adjustments to the inventory ledger to keep Gulf Horizon Bank from freezing our accounts. I moved some numbers around so we could float the debt for a few more weeks. I felt a sudden, desperate flicker of hope in my chest. If Nolan had acted alone out of some misguided loyalty to the company, maybe my son was just a passive participant. Maybe Chase was simply arrogant, not criminal. You altered the vehicle identification numbers? I asked, leaning closer to the table. Yes, Nolan confessed, his shoulders slumping. I used my administrative credentials to override the warning flags after Megan was locked out of the network. I needed to hide the cars that were already sold so the bank would not demand immediate repayment. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a bank deposit slip, pushing it toward us. I took a consulting fee from the secondary loan proceeds, $50,000. I admit it. I took the money, and I changed the lists. He sat back, breathing heavily, like a man who had just dropped a massive physical burden. He was offering us a complete confession. He was giving us the exact mechanism of the fraud, wrapping himself up in the guilt, and presenting it on a silver platter. It felt entirely too easy. Megan picked up the deposit slip, studying it for a few seconds. Then she set it back down, shaking her head. You are lying, Nolan. Nolan blinked, genuine confusion mixing with his fear. I just confessed to altering financial documents. Why would I lie about that? Because you are confessing to the wrong crime, Megan said, leaning across the table until she was only a few feet away from his face. $50,000 is a significant amount of money. It is enough to cover a personal emergency, but it is not enough to buy an entire dealership. You took a consulting fee. Yes. But why did the money go directly to a private checking account instead of a corporate holding account? Vance stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This interview is over. My client has been more than accommodating. Sit down, Megan demanded, her voice echoing in the quiet room. She looked back at Nolan. You owed somebody money, did you not? You have been hiding a debt. Nolan closed his eyes. A single tear escaped, rolling down his pale cheek. My wife did not know, he whispered, his voice trembling. It was an old gambling debt. Online sports betting. It got out of hand. And the interest was piling up. They were threatening to take my house. I just needed enough to clear the balance. The tragic, pathetic reality of the situation settled over the conference room. Nolan Price was not a criminal mastermind. He was a desperate, compromised man who had found himself trapped in a corner. Chase found out about the debt, Megan stated, reading the invisible lines between the facts. He knew you were vulnerable. He offered you $50,000 from the duplicate loan proceeds to pay off your bookie. In exchange, he told you to use your credentials to blind the accounting system. I am not saying another word, Nolan said, staring down at the polished wood. You do not have to, Megan replied, her tone softening just a fraction. Chase will tell the federal investigators that his trusted financial officer went rogue to cover a gambling addiction. He will let you take the fall for the entire multi-million-dollar fraud, while he walks away with 18% of Red Mesa. Nolan looked up, terror completely replacing his previous panic. He knew she was right. He knew the man who had hired him was currently preparing to sacrifice him. Who chose the specific vehicles to hide, Nolan? Megan asked, pushing for the final piece of the puzzle. Who picked the identification numbers for the secondary loans? Nolan opened his mouth to speak, but Vance grabbed his arm, pulling him out of his chair. We are leaving, the lawyer said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. If you want a formal statement from my client, you can offer a written immunity agreement. Until then, do not contact him again. They walked out of the conference room, the heavy wooden door clicking shut behind them. I let out a long, exhausted breath, rubbing my temples. He is terrified of Chase. He should be, Dana Whitaker said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. The attorney sat at the head of the table, her hands neatly folded over a legal pad. Chase holds the operational power, and Nolan holds the digital fingerprints. If this goes to a grand jury, Chase will paint Nolan as a desperate gambler who manipulated the system. Can we offer him immunity? I asked. I am corporate counsel, Robert. Dana reminded me gently. I cannot offer criminal immunity. Only the federal prosecutor can do that. And right now we do not have enough hard evidence to take to the authorities without risking a massive defamation suit from your own son. Megan packed the metadata report and the incorporation documents back into her leather tote bag. We need the internal communications. Nolan knows Chase gave the orders. We just need him to hand over the emails. We left Dana's office and drove back to my house. The heat of the late afternoon felt oppressive, mirroring the heavy silence inside my car. I was processing the reality that my son was not just ambitious, he was predatory. He had actively hunted for a weakness in his own staff, found a man drowning in gambling debt, and used that desperation to tear our family legacy apart. When we pulled into my driveway, a dark silver luxury sedan was parked near my front porch. I recognized the vehicle immediately. It belonged to Howard Bell, a man who had served as an independent director on our corporate board for over a decade. Howard was a retired logistics executive, a man who valued stability, procedure, and quiet problem-solving. He was also a man who deeply feared public scandal. Howard stood on my front porch holding a manila folder. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other as we approached. Howard, I said, stepping onto the porch. We do not have a board meeting scheduled until tomorrow morning. I am not here for a board meeting, Robert, Howard replied, his voice grave. He looked at Megan, a clear expression of disapproval crossing his face. I am here because the chief operating officer sent an emergency notice to the executive committee an hour ago. We have a severe liability crisis on our hands. I unlocked the front door and motioned for him to follow us inside. The cool air of the foyer provided a brief relief from the heat. We walked into the living room, and Howard placed the manila folder on the coffee table. Chase claims that Megan has been harassing company vendors and threatening executive staff, Howard said, getting straight to the point. He sent a formal cease and desist letter to the board, demanding that we enforce the security protocols regarding her termination. Megan crossed her arms, standing near the window. I have not threatened anyone, Howard. I have been gathering public records and requesting my own personnel files. That is not what the audio says, Howard countered, pulling his cell phone from his pocket. He tapped the screen and placed the phone on the glass coffee table. A scratchy, slightly muffled audio recording filled the room. It was Megan's voice. If you do not cooperate, I will tear the system apart, and nobody will be able to stop me. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stared at the phone, then looked at my daughter. Megan looked completely baffled. I never said that, Megan stated, her voice tight with disbelief. That is not a real conversation. It sounds very real to me, Howard said, picking up his phone. Chase told the committee that you left that voicemail for Nolan Price this morning, trying to blackmail him into altering old accounting records to clear your name. He said Nolan was terrified and came straight to human resources. It is spliced, Megan argued, stepping toward the coffee table. Those are different sentences cut together. 2 years ago, when we were upgrading the server software, I told the IT department that if they did not cooperate with the migration schedule, I would tear the old system apart. He took an old meeting recording and edited it. It does not matter if it is edited. Howard shot back, his face flushing red. What matters is that the president of the company is preparing to file a restraining order against the former financial controller, who also happens to be his sister. The bank auditors are arriving tomorrow morning, Robert. We cannot have a public family war happening in the middle of a liquidity crisis. The liquidity crisis is a fabrication, I said, my voice rising with anger. I stepped between Howard and my daughter. Chase is manipulating the floor plan. He is hiding vehicles and preparing to force a sale to Red Mesa so he can collect a secret payout. Howard looked at me with deep pity. It was the worst look a man my age could receive. Chase warned me you would say something like that, Howard said softly. He told the board that you are under an immense amount of stress. He said Megan is feeding you conspiracy theories because she cannot accept that she made mistakes. The trap snapped shut around me. Chase had anticipated our every move. He had built a narrative that painted me as a fragile, confused old man, and Megan as a vengeful, unstable ex-employee. He had provided fake evidence to back it up, using the board's fear of scandal as a weapon. I am demanding that you stop this internal witch hunt, Robert, Howard said, buttoning his suit jacket. The board requires you to cease all independent investigations until the bank completes their official audit. If you continue to let Megan interfere with company personnel, I will be forced to call a vote of no confidence to suspend your chairman privileges. He turned and walked out of the house, leaving the manila folder on the table as a final warning. I stood in the center of the living room, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and absolute helplessness. I wanted to call Howard back. I wanted to drive to the dealership and drag Chase out of his office by his collar. I am going to release a statement, I said, my breathing shallow. I will tell the entire staff that he is lying. I will defend your reputation. No, Megan said firmly. She walked over and put her hand on my arm, grounding me. Words do not beat paper, Dad. If you release a statement, you violate the board's directive, and Howard strips your voting power tomorrow morning. We cannot win a shouting match against a man who controls the microphone. She walked back to her laptop, her expression hardening into something resembling cold steel. We let him think he won today. We let him focus on the board politics. Because while he is watching Howard Bell, he is not watching Nolan Price. The evening stretched into night. We sat in the dining room, reviewing the public records again, trying to find a gap in the armor. I drank cold coffee and watched the clock tick past 9, feeling the weight of the impending bank audit pressing down on me. At exactly 10:15, my cell phone vibrated on the table. It was a text message from Dana Whitaker. Check your email. The scared man finally blinked. I opened my email application, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dana had forwarded a message to my secure account. There was a brief note at the top from the attorney. Nolan contacted my office through a burner phone 10 minutes ago. He realized Chase provided an edited recording to the board, which means Chase is actively creating false evidence. Nolan knows he is being set up as the fall guy. He refused to give a full statement, but he sent this original file to protect himself before he goes dark. I scrolled down to the forwarded message. It was an internal company email, pulled directly from the server archives. The sender was Chase Carter. The recipient was Nolan Price. The timestamp was exactly 4 hours after Megan had been fired and escorted out of the building 18 months ago. I read the words, and the last remaining fragment of my fatherly denial shattered into dust. Nolan, the controller is gone. We have a clear runway. Move the 6 units listed in the attached file off tomorrow's inspection sheet. Use my administrative override if the system flags the location mismatch. We need the capital from the secondary lender by Friday to fund the deposit. Do not copy Megan or Dad on any of this. I stared at the last sentence. Do not copy Dad. He had not just kept me in the dark. He had actively ordered his subordinate to build a wall around me. He sent the list, Megan said, leaning over my shoulder to look at the screen. She pointed to the small paperclip icon at the bottom of the email. Open the attachment. I tapped the icon. A simple spreadsheet opened on the screen. It contained exactly 6 vehicle identification numbers. 6 luxury cars that Chase had ordered Nolan to hide from the bank inspectors. Megan read the numbers aloud, her voice tight. 3 Range Rovers, 2 Mercedes sedans, and 1 silver Porsche demonstrator, ending in 7419. We finally had the direct link, the written order connecting the chief operating officer to the manipulation of the collateral. We take this to Howard in the morning, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Howard will say it is a forged email, Megan replied, stepping back from the table. An email can be typed by anyone. We need physical proof that these 6 cars are currently involved in a fraud, and the only way to prove a car is part of a fraud is to find out where it actually is. The next morning, the Texas heat was already blistering by 7 o'clock. Because Chase had sent the company-wide email stating I was on medical leave, I could not walk through the front doors of the dealership without causing a scene. But as the majority shareholder, I retained the absolute right to inspect the physical premises of any facility owned by the company. I did not go to the main showroom. I drove my sedan to the overflow warehouse in Plano. Megan stayed on the phone with me, monitoring the situation from my dining room, coordinating with Elena Ruiz. The Plano warehouse was a massive steel building surrounded by a high chain-link fence. When I pulled up to the security gate, the guard looked surprised, but he recognized my face and opened the barrier. I parked near the loading dock and walked into the cavernous building. The air inside smelled of rubber tires and concrete dust. Rows of gleaming luxury cars sat parked in precise, taped squares. Elena was waiting for me near the service office. She held a clipboard and a handheld radio frequency scanner. Gulf Horizon Bank just arrived at the main Dallas showroom, Elena said, her voice echoing slightly in the large space. Marcus Grant is leading their field team. They are starting the physical inventory check right now. We need to check the 6 vehicles on Chase's list, I said, handing her a printed copy of the email attachment. Elena took the paper, her eyes scanning the vehicle identification numbers. She nodded, turning toward the vast sea of parked cars. Follow me. We walked down the long rows of vehicles. The silence in the warehouse was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps on the concrete floor. Elena stopped in front of a black Range Rover. She looked at the printed list, then checked the identification plate visible through the lower corner of the windshield. This is the first number, Elena said. She raised the handheld scanner and aimed it at the square radio frequency tag glued to the upper glass. The scanner beeped loudly. The small digital screen flashed red. Location mismatch. Asset assigned to Dallas main showroom. The physical car is here in Plano, I said, looking at the red screen. But the system thinks it is sitting on the lot in Dallas, which means Marcus Grant is looking at an empty parking space right now, Elena confirmed. She moved down the row, checking the next 2 vehicles on the list. The results were identical. The physical cars were hiding in the warehouse, but their digital tags claimed they were miles away. Then, we reached the spot where the 2 Mercedes sedans were supposed to be parked. The concrete squares were completely empty. Elena frowned, checking the inventory map on her clipboard. They are supposed to be in row G, but they are gone. She typed the identification numbers directly into the warehouse management software on her tablet. The screen loaded for a few seconds before displaying the status. Sold, Elena read, her brow furrowing. They were sold to an independent leasing company 8 months ago. I felt the blood drain from my face. If they were sold 8 months ago, the capital should have been returned to Gulf Horizon immediately. But they are still listed on the active collateral sheet. Sold out of trust, Elena whispered, recognizing the severity of the violation. Chase sold the cars, took the cash, and never paid off the original bank loan. He just kept the numbers rolling on the spreadsheets to hide the missing money. We had found 2 mismatched tags and 2 illegally sold vehicles. But there were 6 numbers on the list. My cell phone rang, shattering the quiet of the warehouse. The caller ID displayed the name Marcus Grant. Marcus was the senior credit officer for Gulf Horizon Bank. He was a man who cared exclusively about math, collateral, and mitigating risk. He had never called my personal cell phone before. I answered the call, my hand gripping the phone tightly. "Marcus, Robert," Marcus said. His voice was completely devoid of its usual professional warmth. It was cold, sharp, and strictly business. "I was informed you are on medical leave, but your son is currently refusing to grant my team access to the main server room." "I am not on medical leave," I said clearly. "I am standing in the Plano warehouse." "What is the situation?" "The situation is that I have a massive problem on your lot," Marcus stated. "My auditors have been scanning the inventory for 2 hours. We cannot locate 6 specific high-value units. Your system shows they are parked in the main lot, but the physical spaces are empty." "I know," I said, looking at the empty concrete squares in front of me. "It gets worse," Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave. "I just received an urgent communication from the compliance department at Pinnacle Capital Floor Plan. They are conducting a concurrent audit today, and they flagged a severe discrepancy in the regional database." I closed my eyes, knowing exactly what he was about to say. "One of the vehicles missing from my lot just appeared on a confirmation request from Pinnacle Capital," Marcus said, the anger finally bleeding into his tone. "They claim they hold the primary title to the asset. It is a silver Porsche demonstrator, ending in 7419. The trap had finally closed, and the alarm bells were ringing across 2 different financial institutions. "This is no longer a routine inspection," Robert Marcus said, delivering the final blow. "I am freezing your operating accounts immediately. We are auditing the entire floor plan." I drove back from the Plano warehouse with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The Texas sun was blinding, reflecting off the hood of my sedan, but I felt entirely cold. When I finally pulled into the main lot of Carter Heritage Motors, the environment had completely transformed. The usual hum of sales negotiations and the polished smiles of the floor staff were gone. Instead, men and women in dark suits were systematically moving through the inventory rows, holding clipboards and handheld scanners. Gulf Horizon Bank had arrived. Marcus Grant stood near the entrance of the main showroom, his arms crossed over his chest. He was not looking at the cars. He was looking at Chase. My son stood a few feet away, his hands resting on his hips, trying to project an air of cooperative authority. I parked my car and walked toward the glass doors. Megan arrived a moment later, pulling her sedan into a visitor spot. She stepped out, carrying her heavy leather tote bag, and walked silently beside me. We entered the showroom together. The air conditioning rushed over us, carrying the familiar scent of leather conditioner and expensive floor wax, a smell that had defined my life for 40 years. "Robert," Marcus said, acknowledging me with a sharp nod. He did not ask about my supposed medical leave. He pointed toward the service bays. "My team has secured the perimeter. We are matching the physical tags against the floor plan schedule. So far, the numbers are not aligning." Chase turned toward us. The muscles in his jaw tightened, but he forced a patient, patronizing smile. "Dad, you should be at home resting." I already explained to Marcus that the discrepancy is a lingering software issue. Megan designed the inventory tracking system before she left, and the architecture was fundamentally flawed. We have been trying to patch the errors for months. He was incredibly smooth. Even now, with auditors swarming the building, Chase was spinning the narrative back to his sister's alleged incompetence. He wanted Marcus to believe the missing capital was a technical glitch, a ghost in the machine created by a disgruntled former controller. I looked at Megan, waiting for her to defend herself. I expected her to raise her voice, to present the exception reports right there in the lobby. She did not. Megan adjusted the strap of her bag and looked directly at Marcus. If the architecture is flawed, Mr. Grant, then the system logs will reflect the exact nature of the malfunction. I am here as a minority shareholder to provide any historical context you might need. I recommend we open the central audit log. Marcus narrowed his eyes, studying Megan. He was a banker, a man who evaluated risk for a living, and he recognized the absolute certainty in her tone. Before he could respond, a loud voice echoed from the finance corridor. I do not care about your internal audits. I want the title to my car. We all turned toward the noise. A man in his late 50s, wearing a faded denim jacket, was standing at the finance desk, shouting at one of our sales managers. His face was bright red. That is Mr. Henderson, Chase muttered, his confident facade slipping for a fraction of a second. He is confused about a registration delay. I will handle it. Chase started to walk toward the corridor, but Megan stepped in front of him. A registration delay, or a withheld title? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. She walked past her brother, heading straight for the angry customer. I followed close behind, and Marcus Grant shadowed us, his professional curiosity clearly piqued. Mr. Henderson, Megan said, approaching the desk with her hands open and visible. My name is Megan Carter. I am a shareholder in this company. Please tell me exactly what is happening. The man slammed a heavy folder onto the desk. I bought a used Mercedes sedan from this dealership 8 months ago. I paid in full with a cashier's check, but the state motor vehicle department keeps rejecting my registration because Carter Heritage never released the primary title. I have a car sitting in my driveway that I cannot legally drive, and your finance guy keeps telling me it is a paperwork delay. Megan did not look at the finance manager. She looked at Marcus. The banker's expression had turned to solid granite. Mr. Grant, Megan said softly, a vehicle sold 8 months ago, paid in full, but the title remains locked. Could you explain to my father what that usually indicates? Marcus stepped forward, his presence commanding the space. When a dealership buys a car using our floor plan capital, the bank holds the title as collateral. When the car is sold to a customer, the dealership is required to take the customer's payment, wire the funds to the bank within 48 hours, and then we release the title. He turned his gaze toward Chase, who was standing frozen near a display vehicle. If a customer paid for a car 8 months ago, and the title is still locked, it means the dealership took the customer's money and used it for something else. They never paid the bank. The vehicle was sold out of trust. The phrase hung in the air, heavy and damning. Selling out of trust was not a software error. It was theft. It meant Chase had treated the bank's collateral as his own personal piggy bank, leaving innocent people like Mr. Henderson trapped in a legal nightmare. Megan turned back to the customer. Mr. Henderson, I am personally taking responsibility for this file. You will have your clean title by the end of the week, even if I have to drive to the state registry myself. I am incredibly sorry for the way you have been treated. She prioritized the innocent party. She did not use the man as a prop to yell at her brother. She saw the human cost of the fraud, and she stepped in to stop the bleeding. Just as the tension in the showroom reached a boiling point, the heavy glass front doors slid open again. 2 men in sharp gray suits walked in, carrying leather briefcases. They bypassed the receptionist and walked directly toward our group. I recognized the logo embroidered on the breast pocket of the lead man's suit. Pinnacle, Capital Floor Plan. Chase saw the logo at the exact same moment. The remaining color drained from his face entirely. He stepped forward quickly, trying to intercept the 2 men before they reached Marcus. Gentlemen, Chase said, his voice pitching higher than normal, we are currently conducting a private compliance review. I need to ask you to wait in the executive conference room. Our lending relationship is strictly confidential. The lead Pinnacle representative ignored Chase completely. He looked at Marcus Grant. Marcus, we received your alert through the regional clearinghouse. Are you currently auditing the Highline inventory? We are, Marcus confirmed, crossing his arms. Chase physically stepped between the two bankers. You cannot share proprietary financial data on this floor. It is a violation of our corporate privacy agreements. I am ordering everyone to clear the showroom. Stop talking, Chase, a new voice commanded. Dana Whitaker walked through the glass doors, her heels clicking sharply against the tile floor. Our corporate attorney carried a thick stack of manila folders. She walked directly into the center of the group, establishing an immediate legal perimeter. As corporate counsel, let me clarify the situation, Dana said, looking directly at Chase. Confidentiality agreements apply to trade secrets and operational strategies. They do not apply when two separate financial institutions discover they are holding competing claims on the exact same physical asset. Both lenders have a legal right to verify their collateral. She turned to the Pinnacle representative. Do you have your active schedule? The man opened his briefcase and pulled out a printed spreadsheet. He handed it to Dana. Marcus Grant pulled a similar document from his own clipboard. Dana placed both schedules side by side on the polished hood of a nearby display car. Megan stepped up to the hood, looking down at the two pieces of paper. Line item 42 on the Gulf Horizon schedule, she pointed, and line item 18 on the Pinnacle schedule. I leaned over, reading the text. Both lines described a silver Porsche demonstrator. Both lines listed the exact same model year, the exact same trim package, and the exact same color, and at the end of the row, both documents displayed the vehicle identification number ending in 7419. The same car, owed twice, to two different banks. This is a massive breach of covenant, the Pinnacle representative said, his voice tight with anger. We wired capital to Carter Select Leasing based on the guarantee that this asset was free and clear. Marcus looked at Chase. Carter Select Leasing? That is not the entity we finance. You pledged our collateral to secure a secondary loan through a shadow company? Chase backed away from the car, his hands raised defensively. I do not manage the day-to-day operations of the leasing affiliate. Nolan Price handles those schedules. If a vehicle was double-pledged, it was a clerical error on his part. He probably duplicated the entry when he was trying to fix Megan's old mistakes. He was still trying to use Nolan as a human shield. He was still trying to blame the sister he had exiled. Megan did not argue with the lie. She simply reached into her tote bag and pulled out her laptop. She set it on the hood of the display car, right next to the two competing loan schedules. A clerical error implies an accident, Megan said, opening the laptop. An accident leaves a random digital footprint. Fraud leaves a deliberate trail. She looked at Dana. Did the vendor respond to Marcus's preservation request? Megan asked. Dana nodded and handed her a sealed envelope. Yes. Gulf Horizon invoked the audit access provision in the dealership's software contract. After the collateral discrepancy was confirmed, the vendor produced a certified server export limited to the relevant user accounts, override events, and device approvals. This is not data pulled from the dealership's local network. It came directly from the vendor's archive security environment. Megan opened the envelope and removed the certified pages. That means no one inside this building could rewrite the export after the bank requested it, she said. Correct, Dana replied. And the vendor preserved the underlying records for the lenders and any later investigation. Dana nodded, handing Megan a sealed envelope. The software vendor complied. This is the unalterable server log. It bypasses the dealership's local network completely. No one inside this building has the ability to edit these records. Megan opened the envelope and pulled out a thin stack of paper. She did not hand it to Chase. She handed it directly to Marcus Grant. Mr. Grant, my brother claims I ruined the system and that Nolan Price made a mistake trying to fix it, Megan said, her voice echoing clearly across the quiet showroom. Please look at the timestamp on page 1. That is the exact moment my administrative access was globally revoked by the network administrator. Marcus reviewed the page. Your access was terminated at 2:14 in the afternoon 18 months ago. Now turn to page 3, Megan instructed. Look at the override commands that cleared the duplicate collateral warnings on the silver Porsche. Marcus scanned the dense columns of data. He traced the line with his pen. The warnings were overridden 3 weeks after your access was terminated. The commands were executed using Nolan Price's user credentials. Chase let out a loud theatrical sigh of relief. There it is. Nolan made the changes. Just like I said. He bypassed the warnings, and he double-pledged the car. I had nothing to do with it. Megan shook her head slowly. She did not look at her brother with anger. She looked at him with profound pity. You really do not understand how the architecture works, do you, Chase? She pointed to the final column on the audit log. Nolan's credential initiated the override, but clearing a critical collateral warning on a high-value asset requires a secondary authorization, a multi-factor approval from a senior executive. Marcus read the final column. His eyes widened slightly. The log shows the override was approved via a remote mobile ping. Exactly, Megan said. The system sent a push notification to an authorized device to confirm the action. Look at the device identifier. Marcus read the alphanumeric string aloud. Device registered to Chase Carter. Mobile number ending in 428. The silence in the showroom was absolute. The background noise of the dealership seemed to vanish entirely. My phone was hacked, Chase stammered, stepping backward. Someone spoofed my number. Nolan could have stolen my phone off my desk. Nolan did not steal your face, Megan replied, her tone completely merciless. The vendor log confirms the push notification was unlocked using biometric authentication. Face ID, Chase. You looked directly at your phone, read the override request for the duplicate collateral, and you approved it. The digital trap had closed entirely. There was no clerical error. There was no stolen password. Chase had personally authorized the blinding of the accounting system, allowing the same car to be used as leverage for 2 massive loans. I stood near the glass doors, feeling the physical weight of my son's betrayal pressing down on my chest. For 18 months, I had carried the guilt of firing my daughter, believing I was protecting the company from her incompetence. But the truth was infinitely worse. I had not protected the company. I had handed the keys to a predator. Megan reached into her bag one final time. She pulled out the green folder, the exception report she had tried to show me before I signed her termination papers. She walked over to me, holding the folder in both hands. She did not look at Marcus, or Dana, or the Pinnacle representatives. She only looked at me. Look at the date on my warning email, Dad, Megan said quietly, pointing to the printed correspondence attached to the folder. I sent this to you and Chase at 9 o'clock in the morning. I explicitly asked for lender confirmation before clearing the duplicate vehicles. I looked at the date. Then I looked at the timestamp. Now, Megan said, her voice trembling slightly. Think back to that day. What time did Chase walk into your office and demand my termination? The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. Chase had walked in just before lunch. He had been aggressive, insisting that Megan was a liability, that she was panicking and threatening the stability of the entire enterprise. He had pushed the paperwork across my desk, demanding an immediate decision before the afternoon board meeting. He came in at 11. I whispered, the shame tasting like ash in my mouth. 2 hours, Megan said, a single tear finally escaping her absolute control. I found the duplicate loan structure at 9. And 2 hours later, he convinced you to fire me. I was not terminated because I made a mistake, Dad. I was terminated because I found the truth, and he needed me out of the building before I called the bank. I looked at my daughter, the brilliant, meticulous woman I had sacrificed to maintain a false sense of peace. I had chosen the loud, confident son over the quiet, competent daughter. And that choice had nearly destroyed everything I had ever built. I am so sorry, Megan, I said, my voice breaking. I was blind. I let him use my authority to silence you. Megan wiped the tear from her cheek, her posture straightening. She did not offer a hug. She did not offer absolution. Your apology does not fix the ledger, Dad. And it does not save the employees. Marcus Grant cleared his throat, breaking the heavy emotional current flowing between us. He folded the audit log and placed it on his clipboard. He looked at the Pinnacle representatives, sharing a silent, grim understanding. The evidence is conclusive, Marcus announced, his voice devoid of any warmth. Carter Heritage Motors is in severe breach of its floor plan covenants. We have documented multiple sold out-of-trust violations, deliberate manipulation of collateral tracking, and fraudulent duplication of assets across 2 lending institutions. He turned to me, his expression hardening. Robert, as the primary guarantor, you are ultimately responsible for this facility. Effective immediately, Gulf Horizon Bank is freezing all operating lines of credit associated with this dealership. We will not disperse another dollar to fund your inventory, and we are placing a hard hold on your primary cash accounts pending a full forensic accounting review. The Pinnacle representative nodded in agreement. Our capital is frozen as well. We will be seeking immediate injunctive relief to seize any assets currently titled to Carter Select Leasing. A financial freeze. It was the absolute worst-case scenario. Without the operating lines, a car dealership could not function for more than a few days. We could not buy new inventory. We could not pay our vendors. Chase, who had been standing silently in the corner, suddenly stepped forward. He did not look defeated. He looked like a man who had just been handed exactly what he wanted. This is exactly why we have to sign the Red Mesa agreement, Chase declared, his voice rising, projecting across the showroom so the gathering employees could hear him. The banks are shutting us down over a technical dispute, but Red Mesa Automotive Partners has the independent capital to clear the debt today. They will absorb the floor plan, unfreeze the accounts, and keep this business running. He looked around the room, making eye contact with the sales staff, the receptionists, the porters, who had wandered out from the service bays to watch the commotion. I told you this was coming. I told you we were bleeding cash. If my father does not sign the exclusivity agreement by noon tomorrow, the doors will close, and everyone in this building will lose their job. Red Mesa is our only lifeline. The employees shifted uncomfortably, murmuring among themselves. I saw the fear in their eyes. They did not understand the intricacies of duplicate collateral or multi-factor authentication. They only understood that the men in the gray suits were shutting off the money, and that Chase was offering a solution. Several employees turned their gaze toward Megan. Their looks were not friendly. In their eyes, Megan was the woman who had walked into the building with the bankers and triggered the freeze. Chase had successfully painted her as the destroyer, and even with the truth exposed to the lenders, the staff still believed the lie. Elena Ruiz walked out from the service corridor, wiping grease from her hands with a heavy cloth. She surveyed the frozen room, the tense bankers, and the triumphant look on Chase's face. She walked over to the large digital calendar hanging behind the main reception desk. She tapped the screen, highlighting the upcoming Friday. The banks can freeze the inventory lines, Elena said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. But they also froze the primary cash accounts. That means the automated clearinghouse transfers are blocked. She turned around, looking directly at me, then at Megan. She represented the men and women who lived paycheck to paycheck, the people who would suffer the most from this corporate war. We have 3 days, Elena stated, delivering the final, devastating blow. We have 72 hours before people stop getting paid. The air inside the showroom turned to lead the moment Elena spoke the words. 72 hours. 3 days before the automated clearinghouse transfers bounced. 3 days before the mechanics, the receptionists, and the sales staff realized their paychecks were vapor. The gray-suited auditors from Gulf Horizon Bank did not care about the human cost. They were already packing their briefcases, securing the main server room, and taping formal freeze notices to the finance department doors. A low, frightened murmur rippled through the gathering of employees. A service technician dropped a wrench, the sharp clang echoing off the polished tile floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. I looked at the faces of the people who had built my company. I recognized a woman who had worked the reception desk for 15 years. I saw the young porter who was putting his daughter through community college. Their eyes shifted from the bankers to me and finally settled on Chase. My son did not waste a single second. He stepped up onto the raised display platform, standing next to a pristine luxury sedan, elevating himself above the crowd. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, projecting an image of calm, steady leadership amidst the chaos he had personally engineered. "Everyone, listen to me," Chase called out, his voice strong and reassuring. "I know what this looks like. The banks are overreacting to a technical dispute regarding our inventory software. They have placed a temporary hold on our operating accounts, which unfortunately impacts the payroll distribution scheduled for this Friday." The murmurs escalated into panicked voices. A sales manager near the back raised his hand. "Are we getting paid, Chase? My mortgage is due on the 1st. Chase held up both hands, asking for calm. "You are going to get paid. I promise you that. We have been working for weeks on a massive strategic partnership with Red Mesa Automotive Partners. They possess the independent capital to clear our entire floor plan debt today. They will unfreeze the accounts, protect your benefits, and keep this dealership open. I just need my father to sign the exclusivity agreement." He pointed directly at me. The entire room turned their collective gaze toward my face. The weight of their fear pressed down on my shoulders, heavy and suffocating. Chase was not just selling a lie. He was holding 300 families hostage. And he was publicly handing me the ransom note. Megan stepped forward, inserting herself between me and the crowd. She did not raise her voice to match her brother's theatrical volume. She spoke with the quiet, absolute authority of a woman who knew exactly what the numbers meant. "Red Mesa is not a rescue operation," Megan stated, looking at the sales manager who had asked about his mortgage. "They are an acquisition firm. If they take over, they will liquidate the management structure and restructure your compensation packages. We can solve the payroll crisis without handing them the keys." Chase let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He looked down at his sister from the display platform. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Megan? By running another exception report? The accounts are frozen. The cash is locked. You cannot spreadsheet your way out of a frozen bank account." "We establish a prioritization matrix," Megan replied, ignoring his bait. She turned to address the department heads. "We secure an emergency bridge loan. We cover payroll first. Then we clear the delayed titles for customers like Mr. Henderson. We protect the physical collateral. And we suspend all payments to non-essential vendors until the audit is resolved." "You are talking about carving up the corpse," Chase sneered. "You are telling these people to wait for a bridge loan that a frozen bank will never approve. You are asking them to risk their livelihoods on your empty promises." A few of the employees nodded in agreement with Chase. The fear was blinding them. They did not care about the corporate governance or the duplicate vehicle identification numbers. They cared about their rent. Chase was offering them a solid parachute, while Megan was asking them to help her repair a burning airplane. "I have a solution," Chase announced, stepping down from the platform and walking directly toward me. He stopped 2 feet away, lowering his voice just enough so only the executives and the bankers could hear the details. "I have personal capital," Chase offered, his eyes locking onto mine. "I can wire enough money from my private investment accounts to cover the entire payroll for the next 2 cycles. I will personally act as the bridge lender. The employees will not miss a single dollar." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sudden offer. "You would use your own money?" "I will fund the bridge loan by 5 o'clock today," Chase confirmed, his tone hardening into a sharp edge. "Under 3 conditions. First, you sign the Red Mesa exclusivity agreement right now, guaranteeing the sale. Second, You revoke Megan's shareholder access to the building and halt her internal investigation. And third, you do not contact Pinnacle Capital outside of legal counsel. He was offering a bribe disguised as salvation. He wanted to buy my silence, eliminate his sister, and secure his secret payout from the acquisition firm. Megan stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she looked at her brother. You have been claiming for weeks that your trust fund is tied up in illiquid assets. A payroll cycle for 300 people requires a massive amount of liquid cash. Where exactly is your personal money coming from, Chase? Chase did not look at her. He kept his gaze fixed entirely on me. I am offering you a way to save your employees, Dad. Are you going to take it? Or are you going to let her burn this company to the ground? We are not signing anything today, I said, my voice tight with suppressed rage. I turned to Marcus Grant, who was watching the family drama unfold with cold calculation. Marcus, I need your compliance team to trace the proceeds of the Pinnacle loan through Carter Select Leasing and every account that received those specific funds. I am not asking for open access to Chase's personal banking records. I want the collateral money followed from disbursement to its final destination. Marcus studied me for a moment before answering. We can trace transfers involving the pledged collateral, Carter Select, the dealership, and any recipient account identified in that transaction chain, he said. Records unrelated to those proceeds will require the account holder's consent or formal legal process. Eris will stay inside that boundary. That is all we need, Megan said. Follow the stolen money. Do not go fishing for anything else. Chase scoffed, shaking his head. You are wasting time. You have until tomorrow morning, when the staff walks out because you chose your pride over their paychecks. Remember that I offered you a way out. He turned and walked toward his executive office, the heavy wooden door slamming shut behind him. 10 minutes later, we were sitting in a windowless conference room in the basement of the dealership. The air was stale, smelling faintly of old paper and dust. Dana Whitaker sat at the head of a long plastic table, her laptop open. Next to her sat an independent forensic accountant appointed by Gulf Horizon Bank, a quiet man named Eris, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and rarely blinked. Marcus Grant leaned against the cinderblock wall, his arms crossed. My compliance department authorized the data release because the secondary loans were secured using our primary collateral. We have the legal right to trace the disbursement of the fraudulent funds. Eris turned his laptop screen toward the center of the table. A complex flowchart filled the monitor, connecting green boxes with thick red arrows. The secondary loan proceeds did not stay in the Carter Select Leasing account, Eris explained, his voice a low, steady drone. Pinnacle Capital wired the funds on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the money was divided into 3 distinct outgoing streams. Megan leaned forward, her eyes tracing the red arrows. Where did the first stream go? It went into an escrow account, Eris said, tapping a key to enlarge a specific green box. An account managed by the legal firm representing Red Mesa Automotive Partners. The transfer was labeled as a strategic deposit to secure the terms of the upcoming acquisition. I felt the blood rush to my ears. He used the money he stole from the inventory to pay the deposit for the company that is buying us. He is literally financing his own takeover using my stolen assets. It gets worse, Dana interjected, pointing a manicured finger at the second red arrow on the screen. Show them the personal disbursements, Eris. The accountant clicked another box. A list of wire transfers populated the screen. A significant portion of the loan proceeds was routed through a shell company and deposited directly into a private checking account controlled by Chase Carter, Eris detailed. Within 48 hours of the deposit, we see massive outgoing payments. He cleared the balances on 2 premium credit cards. He paid off a high-interest personal loan. And he wired a substantial sum to an offshore investment portfolio, the money Chase had just offered me upstairs. The so-called personal capital he was willing to use to save the payroll was the exact same money he had stolen from the dealership. He was offering to loan me my own stolen funds and demanding I sign away the company in return. He did not take the loans because the company was failing, Megan whispered, her eyes wide as she realized the true depth of the betrayal. He is not covering operational losses. The cash crisis is entirely artificial. Before I could fully absorb the shock, the conference room door swung open. Elena Ruiz walked in, carrying a thick stack of manila folders. She dropped them onto the plastic table with a heavy thud. I pulled the physical invoices from the sales archives for the last 6 months, Elena announced, pulling up a chair. If you want to know how he drained the legitimate cash flow to create the panic, look at these. Megan opened the top folder. It contained a standard bill of sale for a high-performance sports coupe. The market value on this vehicle is $120,000, Megan noted, scanning the numbers. The invoice shows it was sold for $75,000. That is a massive loss. Who authorized a $45,000 discount? Chase did, Elena answered. Look at the buyer information. I leaned over to read the name on the purchaser line. It was a limited liability company I did not recognize. I spent the last hour running the names of the buyers through the state registry, Elena continued, her voice vibrating with anger. Chase sold 20 premium vehicles significantly below market value over the last 4 months. He sold them to 3 small corporate entities. 2 of those entities are registered to college friends of his. The third is registered to a former business partner. He sold our inventory at a massive loss to his friends, I said, trying to understand the end game. Why? The dealership absorbs the loss, and the balance sheet bleeds. That is the point, Dad, Megan said, her fingers flying across her own phone as she cross-referenced the company names. He needed the quarterly reports to look disastrous so the board would panic and approve a sale. And the friends did not keep the cars, Elena added, delivering the final piece of the puzzle. I checked the vehicle identification numbers against the state transport logs. 2 weeks after Chase sold the cars at a discount, his friends flipped the exact same vehicles to a wholesale affiliate owned by Red Mesa Automotive Partners. They sold them for full market value. The sheer, cold-blooded efficiency of the operation left me completely numb. Chase had systematically gutted the company from the inside out. He sold our best inventory at a loss to create a financial crisis. His accomplices pocketed the difference from Red Mesa. Then, he used the duplicate loan fraud to gather enough cash to fund the deposit for his own takeover. He was an arsonist who had set the building on fire, just so he could charge us for the water. Marcus Grant stepped away from the cinder block wall. He did not look surprised. He looked like a man who had seen human greed 1,000 times before. This establishes criminal intent, Marcus stated cleanly. But it does not change the immediate reality. The bank cannot unfreeze your operating accounts while the primary guarantor is under investigation for a massive collateral shortfall. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. He slid it across the plastic table toward me. Robert, before my compliance team refers this to the federal authorities, I need you to verify this document, Marcus said. I looked down at the paper. It was a master guarantee extension, a legal document that pledged the personal assets of the primary shareholder to cover any catastrophic losses incurred by the dealership. At the bottom of the page, glowing in stark black ink, was my electronic signature. I did not sign this, I said, my voice catching in my throat. The digital audit trail says you did, Marcus replied calmly. The signature was executed from your dedicated terminal in the executive suite, using your unique biometric passcode. I stared at the black ink. A memory surfaced, cutting through the fog of my panic. 2 months ago, I was sitting in my office, preparing to leave for a charity golf tournament. Chase had walked in holding a tablet. He said the accounting software required a routine security renewal to keep the licenses active. He had handed me the tablet, and I had pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner without reading the dense legal text on the screen. I had trusted my son, and he had used that trust to place a target directly on my own home. If this guarantee holds, Dana Whitaker said softly, reading the clauses on the paper, Gulf Horizon Bank has the right to seize your personal liquid assets to cover the floor plan shortfall, your investment portfolios, your classic car collection, your secondary real estate. The silence in the basement room was heavy and absolute. I had spent 40 years building a fortune, believing I was securing a legacy for my children. Now, that fortune was the only thing standing between the bank and the total destruction of the company. "How much is the immediate shortfall?" I asked, my voice sounding like it belonged to an old, exhausted stranger. "How much do we need to clear the frozen titles and cover the payroll bridge until the forensic audit clears?" Eris tapped his keyboard. "To satisfy the emergency demands of both lenders and fund the employee payroll accounts, you need a minimum cash injection of $4 million, and you need it transferred into a clean holding account by tomorrow afternoon. $4 million in liquid cash. In 24 hours. I stood up from the plastic table. I did not look at Megan. I did not look at the bankers. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and walked into the narrow hallway outside the conference room. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped insects. I dialed the number for my private wealth manager. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Robert," the manager said cheerfully, "I was not expecting to hear from you today. I need a short-term bridge loan," I stated, skipping the pleasantries entirely. $4 million, wired to a corporate trust account by noon tomorrow. There was a long pause on the line. The cheerfulness vanished instantly. "Robert, generating that kind of liquidity in 24 hours is incredibly difficult. We would need massive, unencumbered collateral to underwrite the transfer that fast." "Use the lake house," I said, the words tasting like copper in my mouth. The lake house was a massive cedar and glass estate I had built for my wife 10 years ago. It was fully paid off. It was the place I went to remember her. It was the only piece of property Chase had never tried to involve in the business. "The lake house equity will cover a portion," the wealth manager calculated quickly. "But the underwriting department will require more for a $4 million overnight bridge. You are asking them to bypass a month of standard due diligence. I will liquidate the collector cars," I offered, my chest tightening with every word. I owned 6 vintage automobiles, pristine machines I had spent decades restoring. They were not just assets. They were pieces of my personal history. "I know a private dealer in Houston," I continued, forcing my voice to remain steady. "He has been trying to buy the collection for years. Call him. Tell him I will accept 30% below his last offer if he wires the funds to your institution by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Use the transfer confirmation to back the remainder of the bridge loan." "Robert, you are taking a massive personal loss," the manager warned. "If you fire sale those assets, you cannot get them back." "Just make the calls," I ordered, and ended the connection. I leaned my forehead against the cool cinder block wall of the hallway. The sacrifice was immense. I was trading the sanctuary I had built for my wife and the passion projects that define my weekends, just to buy the company a few days of oxygen. But as I stood there, I realized the core truth of the situation. I had enabled Chase for years. I had funded his arrogance. I had fired the daughter who tried to warn me. The consequence of my blindness could not be paid by the employees who trusted me. It had to be paid by me. I walked back into the conference room. Megan was watching the doorway, her eyes searching my face. "I secured the capital," I announced, looking directly at Marcus Grant. "The funds will hit a clean trust account by tomorrow morning. It will cover the payroll and the frozen titles." Marcus nodded slowly. "If the funds clear, Gulf Horizon will authorize a temporary release of the operating accounts under the strict supervision of an independent restructuring officer. But it does not erase the fraud, Robert. The federal investigation will continue." "I welcome the investigation," I replied. We spent the next several hours working with Dana and Eris, structuring the trust account and drafting the emergency communications for the staff. By the time we walked out of the basement conference room, the sun had set, and the showroom above was dark and empty. I drove home in silence. The physical exhaustion was settling deep into my bones. I knew tomorrow would be the hardest day of my professional life. I had to face the board of directors, present the temporary bridge loan, and officially begin the process of stripping my own son of his power. But when I pulled into my driveway, The exhaustion was instantly replaced by a sharp spike of adrenaline. Chase's black sport utility vehicle was parked in front of my garage. The lights in my living room were blazing. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the foyer. Megan, who had followed me home in her own car, walked in right behind me. Chase was sitting on my living room sofa. He looked entirely relaxed. On the glass coffee table in front of him sat the thick leather binder from Red Mesa, alongside a fresh stack of legal documents printed on heavy bond paper. "You are working late," Chase said, not bothering to stand up. "I saw Marcus Grant leave the building. I assume he told you the full extent of the freeze." "He told me everything," I said, walking slowly into the room. "And we found the metadata, Chase. We found the internal emails to Nolan Price. We know you created the duplicate schedules, and we know you drafted the acquisition proposal to secure a personal payout." I expected him to deny it. I expected the panic I had seen at the gas station. Instead, Chase smiled. It was a cold, empty expression. "Metadata and old emails," Chase dismissed, waving a hand in the air. "You can take those to Howard Bell in the morning, Dad. You can tell the board I am a monster. You can even take them to the federal prosecutor eventually. But none of that matters right now." He tapped his finger against the fresh stack of legal documents on the glass table. "This is the finalized closing package from Red Mesa Automotive Partners," Chase announced. "Their legal team expedited the paperwork. They are ready to wire $50 million into the corporate accounts the moment you sign the final page." "I am not signing anything," I stated, my voice echoing in the large room. "I secured a personal bridge loan. I am using my own assets to cover the payroll and clear the titles tomorrow morning. We do not need Red Mesa." Chase laughed, a harsh grating sound. He picked up his cell phone and tossed it onto the coffee table. "Your private wealth manager talks too much, Dad," Chase said, his eyes glittering with malice. "He called our corporate finance desk an hour ago to verify the routing numbers for the trust account. He mentioned the collateral you are using." My stomach dropped. "You are trying to secure a $4 million overnight bridge loan using a residential property and a fire sale of vintage cars," Chase mocked. "Do you really think the bank underwriters are going to process a manual collateral transfer in 12 hours? The money from the dealer might hit the account, but the mortgage equity will be tied up in compliance review for at least a week." He stood up, walking slowly around the coffee table until he was standing directly in front of me. "Your bridge loan is not funded yet, Dad," Chase said. "The wire from the collector car dealer may clear tonight, but the private lender still needs a recorded lien on the lake house and a control agreement over the trust account. If either condition misses the deadline, the remaining money does not move. Payroll fails on Friday." He was not delivering a mathematical truth. He was taking a genuine underwriting risk and presenting it as a guaranteed failure. "Red Mesa does not have those conditions," Chase continued. "Their money is already sitting in escrow. You sign tonight, they fund. You refuse, and you are gambling 300 paychecks on a county filing office, a private lender, and a bank compliance department moving faster than they normally do." He placed the silver pen against my chest. "Maybe your bridge closes," he said quietly. "Maybe it does not. But if you choose the gamble and the money arrives late, those employees will remember that Red Mesa was ready to pay them and you chose a family war instead. The dealer money will only cover a fraction of the shortfall. You cannot cover the payroll. You cannot unfreeze the operating accounts. The company is going to default, and 300 people are going to lose their health insurance on Friday." He picked up a heavy silver pen from the table and held it out toward me. "Red Mesa is ready to fund right now," Chase said, his voice dropping to a smooth, persuasive rhythm. "They have the cash sitting in an escrow account, waiting for your signature. If you sign this agreement, the employees get paid. The business survives. The legacy continues." He pressed the pen against my chest. "If you do not sign, you are choosing to let 300 families pay the price for a fight you cannot win. You are choosing to destroy their lives just to punish me." I looked down at the pen. My hand trembled as I slowly reached up and took it from his grasp. The metal felt ice cold against my skin. He had cornered me completely. The bridge loan was a desperate gamble, and Chase knew the banking system well enough to recognize the structural delays. If the money did not clear, the employees would face total devastation. If I signed the document, I was rewarding the man who had set the fire, allowing him to walk away with a fortune built on fraud. Megan stepped forward, her eyes blazing with a fierce, uncompromising light. She looked at the Red Mesa documents, then looked at me. "Do not sign it, Dad," Megan pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "If you sign that paper, you validate everything he has done. You prove that a thief can hold a company hostage and get paid for the ransom." I looked at my daughter. Then I looked at the list of employee names I had visualized in my mind all day. The receptionist, the porter, the mechanics. "If I do not sign," I whispered, the words tearing at my throat, 300 families may pay for my son's crime. I leaned over the glass coffee table and placed the tip of the silver pen directly onto the signature line of the Red Mesa agreement. Megan reached out, her hand hovering just inches from the paper, forcing a choice that would define the rest of our lives. I watched my father lean over the glass coffee table, the tip of the heavy silver pen trembling a fraction of an inch above the signature line. The Red Mesa Automotive Partners closing package lay open before him. That thick stack of bond paper represented the end of our family legacy and the only immediate salvation for 300 employees. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm echoing in the quiet living room. Chase stood on the opposite side of the table. My brother wore a tailored Navy suit and an expression of absolute, predatory focus. He was holding 300 families hostage, using their paychecks as a weapon to force our father to surrender. I reached out, my hand moving with a sudden, decisive speed. I did not grab the pen. I simply placed my palm flat over the signature block, covering the blank line completely. "Move your hand, Megan," Chase warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. He shifted his weight, his posture rigid. The wire transfer is cued. Dad signs, the bank releases the funds, and the payroll goes through. You are risking innocent people just to win an argument. I refused to look at my brother. My eyes remained locked on my father. The exhaustion etched into his 61-year-old face was heartbreaking, but I could not let him surrender to a thief. "I am not moving my hand until you read Section 4 of the agreement, Dad," I instructed, keeping my voice perfectly even. "Look at the management continuity clause." My father lowered the pen, his chest heaving with a heavy sigh. He used his free hand to turn back a few pages in the thick stack of paper. The legal jargon filled the page, dense and intentionally confusing. It states that a designated group of current executive officers will be retained to ensure operational stability post-acquisition, my father read aloud, his voice raspy and thin. "It does not name anyone specifically." "Exactly," I said, pulling my palm away from the paper. "The clause does not name the beneficiaries. It simply guarantees a select group gets to keep their jobs and potentially roll their equity into the new corporate structure. And because Chase is an active officer of this company negotiating the sale, he is a related party. Under our corporate bylaws, any transaction providing an undisclosed benefit to a related party requires the explicit consent of the Employee Ownership Trust." Chase let out a sharp, dismissive breath, crossing his arms over his chest. "That is a boilerplate clause for a standard corporate transition. It does not apply here. And Elena Ruiz does not have the authority to block a $50 million acquisition over a technicality. Elena has a 10% voting block and a legal mandate to protect the staff," I countered, finally turning to face him. "If you are the hidden beneficiary in that continuity clause, Chase, the deal is invalid without her signature. And she is not going to sign it." My father looked at the document, then up at his son. The desperation in Chase's eyes was entirely real. But it was not the desperation of a man trying to save his employees. It was the absolute panic of a man watching a secret payout slip through his fingers. The silver pen slipped from my father's grip, landing on the glass table with a soft final click. "I am not signing it today," my father announced, stepping back from the coffee table. He straightened his shoulders. We will find another way to clear the payroll. Chase stared at the pen, his jaw clenching so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. He looked at our father with an expression of pure, unfiltered hatred. You are going to lose everything, Chase whispered. My brother turned on his heel and walked out of the house. The front door slammed shut, with enough force to rattle the window panes. The silence in the living room felt absolute, heavy and suffocating. My father sank into the sofa, the adrenaline leaving his body and replacing it with a bone-deep exhaustion. I sat in the armchair opposite him, giving him space to process the massive financial choice he had just made. Dana Whitaker arrived 30 minutes later. Our corporate counsel walked through the front door carrying a laptop and a portable printer, transforming the dining table into a makeshift legal office. The reality of my father's financial commitment was about to be formalized in ink. Dana printed the emergency loan documents and slid them across the polished oak. She did not offer a sympathetic smile. The attorney looked like a surgeon preparing to amputate a limb to save a dying patient. Robert, I need you to understand the exact nature of what you are about to execute, Dana said, tapping a manicured finger against the top page of the contract. You are authorizing a short-term commercial bridge loan backed by your personal estate. You are placing a lien on the lake house. You are transferring ownership of your classic car collection to a private dealer at a severe loss. You are injecting your liquid savings into a corporate trust account to serve as the primary guarantee layer. My father looked at the paperwork. The numbers printed on the page were staggering, representing decades of relentless work. Will it be enough to satisfy Marcus Grant and clear the payroll by Friday? My father asked. The collector car dealer has already wired $1,400,000 into the controlled account, Dana said. The private lender has credit approved the remaining $2,600,000 against the lake house, but funding is still conditional. The lien must be electronically recorded. The title report must remain clean. And Gulf Horizon must sign the account control agreement. She placed 3 documents in front of me. The county accepts electronic filings overnight. Your wealth manager has paid for expedited title verification. If those confirmations arrive before 7:30 tomorrow morning, the remaining funds will enter the trust account in time. Until the confirmations arrive, I will not call the bridge funded. Later, at the board meeting, replace. The trust account is fully funded. The county recorded the lake house lien at 6:48 this morning, Marcus said. The collector car wire cleared before 7, and the private lender released the balance after Gulf Horizon executed the control agreement. The trust account is now fully funded, adjusting her glasses. Gulf Horizon Bank will accept the trust account as collateral to temporarily unfreeze the specific operating lines tied to employee compensation, but you will have virtually zero personal liquidity remaining. If the federal audit uncovers more fraudulent liabilities, you will lose the lake house permanently. You are betting your entire retirement on a severely damaged company. My father picked up a cheap plastic pen from the table. It looked entirely different from the heavy silver instrument Chase had tried to force into his hand. Years ago, I used my money to build a wall around my family, my father said, staring directly at the signature block. I thought wealth could buy peace. I thought if I just gave Chase enough authority and a large enough office, he would stop resenting his sister. I used my resources to avoid making the hard choices. Now, the money has to pay for the damage that choice caused. He signed the documents, pressing hard enough to leave a permanent indentation on the wood beneath the paper. I watched him sign. I did not offer a comforting touch. I did not tell him he was acting like a hero. I simply reached across the table and placed a single sheet of typed paper in front of him. What is this? My father asked, looking at the fresh document. It is a formal relinquishment of your audit oversight authority, I explained, keeping my voice clinical and precise. You are stepping away from any active role in the internal investigation. You will not review the findings before they go to the board. You will not try to soften the blow for Chase. You will give the independent forensic team and me absolute authority to follow the digital trail. no matter where it leads. He looked up, his eyes searching my face. I was protecting the investigation from his own lingering weakness. As a parent, my father had protected my brother before, ignoring my warning emails to preserve the family image. I was ensuring he could never do it again. He signed my document without hesitation. The next morning, the executive boardroom at the dealership felt exactly like a pressurized cabin. The air conditioning hummed aggressively, struggling against the rising Texas heat beating against the floor-to-ceiling windows. My father sat at the head of the long mahogany table. To his right sat Howard Bell, the independent director who had served on the board for over a decade. Elena Ruiz sat to his left, wearing her dark service department uniform, her presence a stark contrast to the tailored suits filling the room. Chase sat at the far end of the table, his posture relaxed, projecting an aura of absolute confidence. Marcus Grant stood near the projector screen, representing Gulf Horizon Bank. The senior credit officer did not bother to sit down. The bank has reviewed the structure of the personal bridge loan, Marcus began, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension. The trust account is fully funded. The $4 million provides sufficient collateral to temporarily unfreeze the specific operating lines tied to employee compensation and vehicle titling. A collective breath of relief seemed to pass through the room. Howard Bell wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. However, Marcus continued, his tone hardening instantly. The temporary unfreeze is highly conditional. Carter Heritage Motors is currently under investigation for duplicate collateral financing and massive sold-out-of-trust violations. The bank will not release a single dollar unless the board immediately suspends the chief operating officer pending the results of the forensic audit. Chase leaned forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He did not look panicked. You cannot suspend me based on an incomplete audit. I am the only person holding the Red Mesa deal together. If you remove me, the buyers walk, and the bank gets nothing but liquidated assets. The buyers are currently negotiating an acquisition based on entirely fraudulent inventory numbers, Marcus countered, his face a mask of professional indifference. Gulf Horizon also requires the immediate appointment of an independent restructuring officer to oversee the disbursement of the bridge funds. We need someone who understands the exact architecture of your accounting software. Elena Ruiz raised her hand, her dark eyes locking onto Chase. The employee trust formally nominates Megan Carter for the position of interim restructuring officer. Howard Bell shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. The independent director adjusted his glasses, looking nervously between my father, my brother, and Elena. This is highly irregular, Howard protested, his voice carrying a distinct flutter. We are facing a massive federal inquiry, and we are proposing to hand the operational authority to the chairman's daughter, who was terminated from this exact company 18 months ago for inventory mismanagement. This looks like a hostile family coup. It looks like an attempt to stop a thief. Elena shot back, leaning across the table. Megan found the duplicate loans. She proved the system was altered after she left. She made an accusation, Howard corrected gently, avoiding my gaze. She has not proven legal intent. And installing her right now exposes the board to massive liability. Chase stood up, slowly buttoning his suit jacket. He did not yell. He commanded the room with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his entire life manipulating a crowd. Howard is absolutely right, Chase said, walking slowly toward the center of the room. We are letting emotion dictate corporate governance. My father is under an immense amount of personal stress. He just liquidated his private estate to fund a bridge loan because he is terrified of losing his legacy. And my sister is taking advantage of that fear. My brother turned to look directly at our father. I love you, Dad. But you are not thinking clearly. You are letting Megan use this crisis to settle an old score. Chase reached into his pocket and placed a small digital audio recorder on the polished wood table. He pressed a silver button. The scratchy, muffled sound of my own voice filled the boardroom. If you do not cooperate, I will tear the system apart, and nobody will be able to stop me. The recording clicked off. The silence that followed was suffocating. That is a heavily edited file, Elena stated loudly, breaking the quiet. Megan was talking to the Information Technology Department 2 years ago about a server migration. You spliced the audio. Can you prove that, Elena? Chase asked, his tone perfectly reasonable and smooth. Because right now, it sounds exactly like a disgruntled former employee threatening to destroy the company database. And now, you want to hand her the keys to the kingdom. He turned back to Howard Bell, moving in for the kill. Under Section 7 of our corporate bylaws, the board has a fiduciary duty to protect the company from erratic leadership. I am formally proposing an emergency motion. We must temporarily suspend the chairman's operational authority pending a medical evaluation. Furthermore, Megan Carter must be explicitly barred from all company premises to prevent any further interference with the bank's audit. My hands curled into fists beneath the table. Chase was using my father's sacrifice against him. My brother was painting the desperation to save the employees as evidence of mental instability, weaponizing a son's fake concern to execute a corporate takeover. You cannot suspend the chairman without a majority vote, Dana Whitaker warned, speaking up from the corner of the room. This is a board motion, not a shareholder vote, Dana said sharply. Howard does not own 15% of this company. He holds one independent director seat. Robert, Chase, Elena, and Howard are the 4 currently seated directors. The 5th seat remains vacant. Chase did not lose his composure. Then the result is even simpler, he replied. Dad must recuse himself from the narrow question of whether his operational authority should be limited pending an independent review. That leaves 3 eligible directors, me, Howard, and Elena. Dana looked toward my father. Robert, recusal from this motion does not cancel your shares, remove you from the board, or authorize a sale, she warned. It only prevents you from voting on the temporary restriction concerning your own operational conduct. My father nodded once and withdrew from the motion. Chase voted yes. Elena voted no. Every eye turned toward Howard. The independent director removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I vote yes to a temporary operational restriction and a 24-hour independent review, he said. I am not voting to approve the Red Mesa sale. The motion passes 2 votes to 1, Dana stated. Robert remains chairman and majority shareholder, but his day-to-day operational authority is temporarily limited. Megan is barred from the premises until the review. Any acquisition still requires its own approvals, including every related party disclosure required by the bylaws. Chase smiled because he believed the distinction did not matter. He believed the payroll deadline would force my father to sign the shareholder consent before the next morning ended. He looked at the independent director, perfectly exploiting the old man's fear of scandal. Howard, if you do not vote with me to secure the premises and finalize the Red Mesa acquisition, the bank will seize everything today. The legal liability will fall directly on the board. I stood up, pushing my chair back. The scrape of the wooden legs echoed loudly. I grabbed my laptop from my tote bag and placed it directly in front of Howard Bell. Before the board votes on any suspension, you need to see what Red Mesa's actually buying, I announced, typing a quick command to wake the screen. Megan, you are not authorized to speak in this meeting, Chase said, his voice tightening with genuine irritation. Dana received the preliminary data room index from Red Mesa's legal counsel 10 minutes ago, I continued, completely ignoring my brother. They provided a list of all documents currently held in escrow, pending the sale's signature. I tapped the keyboard, highlighting a specific row on the index sheet glowing on the screen. Look at line item 47, I instructed. Howard leaned forward, squinting at the monitor. He read the text aloud, his voice wavering with anxiety. Project Crown. Subfolder. Management rollover. Side letter agreement regarding 18% equity retention and chief executive officer appointment. Designated beneficiary. CC. The entire room froze. The implication of the document struck the mahogany table like a physical weight. C. Elena repeated, turning a furious, blazing glare toward Chase. Chase Carter. My brother did not flinch. He maintained his composed posture, though the muscles in his neck strained against his collar. CC stands for Corporate Continuity. It is a standard placeholder acronym used by Red Mesa to designate a future executive trust. It does not stand for my name. You are lying, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. You drafted the acquisition proposal 4 months ago. You manufactured the liquidity crisis by selling highline inventory at a massive loss to your college friends. And you negotiated a secret side letter that guarantees you 18% of the new company and the chief executive officer title, all while our father loses his entire estate. Howard stared at the screen, a large bead of sweat forming on his forehead. Is there a physical copy of this side letter? Does it explicitly name Chase? Red Mesa holds the original, I admitted, my jaw tightening in frustration. The index only lists the acronym, but the intent is incredibly obvious. Chase smiled. It was a small, victorious expression that made my blood run cold. Intent requires proof, Megan. Chase countered softly. An acronym on a data index is not proof of fraud. It is just another desperate accusation from a woman who cannot accept her own professional failures. He turned his attention entirely to Howard, locking the old man in a visual cage. The bank is waiting. Red Mesa is waiting. If we do not restore order right now, the employees lose everything. We vote on the suspension. The tension in the boardroom reached an absolute breaking point. The air felt thin, electric, with the weight of the impending decision. Howard Bell removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose with a shaking hand. He was an older man who hated conflict, a man who preferred quiet compromises over public explosions. Chase had perfectly exploited that weakness by presenting the Red Mesa deal as the only safe harbor and painting me as the chaotic storm. My brother had successfully cornered the independent director. The priority must be the survival of the entity, Howard said, his voice trembling slightly. He refused to look at my father. The allegations regarding the duplicate loans are severe, but they must be investigated by the authorities, not by a family member with a known conflict of interest. The Red Mesa acquisition provides immediate liquidity and protects the staff. Howard, do not do this, my father warned, his voice low and steady. If you vote with him, you are handing the company to a predator. I vote to approve the emergency motion, Howard stated, rushing the words out of his mouth to avoid my father's gaze. The chairman's operational authority is temporarily suspended. Megan Carter is barred from the premises. Elena slammed her hand against the mahogany table. The employee trust votes no. You cannot ignore the fraud happening right in front of you. The motion passes 35% to 10%, Chase announced smoothly, taking immediate and total control of the room. Dad, your shares are legally recused from this specific competency action. The suspension is active. Chase turned to Marcus Grant, adjusting his suit jacket. Mr. Grant, I am now the acting chief executive officer. I will not authorize the appointment of an external restructuring officer. However, I invite Gulf Horizon to maintain their physical presence on the lot while we finalize the Red Mesa acquisition. The sale vote will occur tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Marcus did not argue. The senior credit officer simply closed his leather briefcase. The bank cared exclusively about the recovery of their capital, not the internal politics of the board of directors. If a corporate sale covered the massive debt, the bank would step aside and collect their money. Chase looked at me. He did not need to call the security guards. The legal reality of the vote meant I was officially trespassing. You have 5 minutes to leave the building, Megan, Chase ordered, his voice carrying the cold authority of a man who had just conquered a kingdom. If you are not gone, I will have the police remove you. I closed my laptop. I did not argue. I did not yell. I packed the computer into my leather tote bag with absolute terrifying precision. My father stood up from the table, his legs looking incredibly heavy. He had sacrificed his home, his prized collection, and his personal peace, and it had not been enough. The corporate system had protected the liar, because the liar knew exactly how to weaponize the rules. I walked toward the boardroom doors. Chase stepped directly into my path, leaning in close so only I could hear his final gloating words. "You always thought numbers made you powerful," Chase whispered, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You thought the spreadsheets would save you. But tomorrow morning, I own the numbers. And I own the building." I did not break eye contact. I stepped around him and walked out into the carpeted hallway. My father followed me out of the executive suite. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut behind us, locking us out of the company he had built with his own hands. We walked through the main showroom in total silence. The employees watched us leave, their faces a mixture of deep confusion and escalating fear. When we reached the front doors, the afternoon sun hit us like a physical wall. The Texas heat was suffocating. "He won the vote," my father said, his voice barely audible over the noise of the traffic on the nearby highway. "He has Howard in his pocket. He blocked the bridge loan structure. Tomorrow morning they will sign the company over to Red Mesa, and he will get his payout." I stopped on the concrete sidewalk. I turned to face the massive glass facade of Carter Heritage Motors. The silver Porsche was still parked in the premium vehicle space, a glaring reminder of the lie that had started this entire chain reaction. "He won a procedural delay," I corrected, my voice hardening into something sharp and entirely unbreakable. "He thinks because he locked the doors, the war is over. He forgot that the most dangerous evidence is not sitting inside that building." I pulled my cell phone from my pocket, the screen glowing brightly in the harsh sun. "We need the original side letter," I stated, my eyes locking on to my father's defeated face. "If we get the physical document proving he is the beneficiary, Elena can legally veto the sale tomorrow morning regardless of Howard's vote. We just need a witness on the inside to authenticate it." "Who?" my father asked, desperation finally clawing at his chest. "Nolan is terrified. He refused to hand over the emails yesterday." "Nolan is terrified of Chase," I agreed, dialing a specific phone number. "But right now, Chase does not need Nolan anymore. Which means Nolan is about to realize he is completely expendable." The line rang twice before the outsourced financial officer answered. "You are not supposed to be calling me," Nolan whispered, panic-coding every syllable. "Chase just suspended my father and locked me out of the building," I said, skipping the greeting entirely. "He scheduled the sale vote for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." "I know," Nolan replied, his breathing shallow. "He sent a memo. He told everyone you were trying to destroy the payroll." "Listen to me very carefully, Nolan," I instructed, my tone flat and unforgiving. "Chase engineered this entire crisis to force a sale to Red Mesa. He negotiated a side letter guaranteeing himself an equity stake in the chief executive officer position. When the deal closes tomorrow, he gets a payout. What do you get?" Silence stretched over the phone line. The realization was slowly sinking into Nolan's mind. "I get to keep my job," Nolan finally answered, though he did not sound convinced. "You get to hold the bag," I corrected brutally. "You altered the inventory lists. You registered the shadow company. You took a $50,000 consulting fee to pay a gambling debt. When the federal investigators trace the duplicate loans, Chase will hand them your name. He will claim you acted alone to cover your personal debts. He will walk away a millionaire, and you will go to federal prison." I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The truth was ugly, and it was unavoidable. "What do you want?" Nolan asked, the last remnants of his corporate loyalty breaking apart. "I want the original side letter from Red Mesa," I demanded. "I want the emails Chase sent you ordering the collateral manipulation, and I want you to testify to the employee trust that Chase is the hidden beneficiary of tomorrow's sale." "I cannot get the side letter," Nolan stammered, pacing nervously. "Red Mesa holds the original document. Their legal team is bringing it tomorrow for the final closing signatures." "Then we need the person carrying the document to tell the truth," I said, a new strategy forming instantly in my mind. "Who was the primary contact at Red Mesa? Who wrote the acquisition proposal with Chase?" "Leah Morgan," Nolan revealed. "She is a senior partner at Red Mesa, but she will not talk to you. She wants this deal to close just as much as Chase does. She will talk to me when I show her what she is actually buying, I promised. Hanging up the phone, I looked at my father. He stood on the sidewalk, his posture straightening slightly as he realized the fight was not over. "We are not going home," I announced, walking toward my sedan. "We are going to find Leah Morgan, and we are going to show her exactly how much toxic debt Chase Carter is trying to hide." The Texas sun beat down on the concrete sidewalk, radiating a thick, suffocating heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. I stood just beyond the heavy wrought iron perimeter gates of Carter Heritage Motors, watching the morning shift arrive for work. My father had stayed behind in the executive parking lot, his hands resting heavily on the roof of his sedan, needing a moment to process his own suspension before security escorted him away. The physical distance between the street and the main showroom was less than 200 feet, but the corporate barrier felt entirely impenetrable. Employees walked past the gates in small clusters, clutching coffee cups and wearing their pressed uniform shirts. Every single person avoided my gaze. Mechanics who had known me for a decade suddenly found the cracked pavement fascinating. Sales associates I had helped train actively crossed the street to enter through the secondary service doors. The isolation settled deep into my chest, heavy and cold, completely ignoring the summer temperature. They had all seen the emergency video broadcast. Less than 15 minutes ago, a notification had pinged every company's cellular device and desktop monitor. My brother had stood in front of a high-definition camera, wearing a perfectly tailored Navy suit, projecting an image of weary, steadfast leadership. Chase had looked directly into the lens and delivered a devastating, meticulously crafted lie. He told 300 people that my bitter interference had triggered a banking panic, causing Gulf Horizon to freeze the operating accounts and threaten their weekly paychecks. A young porter walked past the gate, carrying a stack of fresh dealership license plates. He was a hard-working kid, someone whose daughter I used to buy fundraising cookies from every single spring. He looked at me for a fraction of a second, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and genuine anger, before turning his head away sharply. The narrative had worked flawlessly. Chase had effectively weaponized the fear of missing rent, turning the entire workforce into a defensive shield. I watched the porter disappear into the service bay, my jaw aching from clenching my teeth together. My cell phone vibrated in the pocket of my gray trousers, the sudden buzz jarring against my leg. I pulled the device out, expecting to see a message from Elena Ruiz or Dana Whitaker. Instead, the caller identification displayed the name of the attorney representing Nolan Price. The outsourced financial officer was supposed to be our wedge, the inside witness who could crack the entire duplicate loan scheme wide open. I answered the call, bringing the phone to my ear. The lawyer spoke immediately, using a clipped, aggressive cadence that left no room for pleasantries. He informed me that his client had experienced a sudden and total failure of memory regarding any verbal instructions from the chief operating officer. The cooperation we had tentatively secured just hours ago was completely gone. Chase had apparently paid Nolan a visit before the emergency board meeting. My brother had placed a drafted criminal referral document on the accountant's desk, outlining a narrative where Nolan executed the fraud alone to cover massive gambling debts. The threat was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. The terrified financial officer had chosen the immediate, fragile safety of silence over the immense risk of turning state's evidence against a man about to become the chief executive officer. I listened to the attorney demand that we cease all contact with his client, maintaining a perfectly level breathing pattern. Panic would not solve the problem. I did not yell into the receiver, and I did not offer desperate pleas. I simply stated that the digital audit trails currently sitting in the hands of federal bank examiners would eventually require an explanation. Without Nolan providing the context of coercion, the server logs would paint him as the sole architect of a multi-million-dollar bank fraud, leaving him to face the federal prosecutors, completely alone. The lawyer absorbed the statement, offered a tight, non-committal response, and terminated the connection. The line went dead. The only internal witness we possessed had just boarded up his own windows. We needed physical data, something entirely immune to my brother's manipulation and Nolan's cowardice. I dialed Elena Ruiz, instructing the service director to meet me at a small, independent coffee shop located 2 miles away from the dealership campus. The diner was a quiet, dimly lit space smelling intensely of roasted beans and burnt sugar, safely removed from the corporate gossip mill. Elena arrived 10 minutes later, wearing her dark service uniform, carrying a heavy metal tablet under her arm. She slid into the vinyl booth across from me, her expression grim and focused. The service director did not bother ordering a drink. She placed the tablet flat on the scratched wooden table and tapped the screen to wake the processor. The maintenance contract for our security hardware included a very specific failsafe. To resolve ongoing billing disputes regarding equipment degradation, the vendor stored a permanent, unalterable record of every single radio frequency ping registered at the gates. Because she served as the primary authorized contact for all facility maintenance, Elena had legally requested the raw data export directly from the vendor's cloud server. We opened the massive spreadsheet, staring at thousands of lines of raw, unformatted code. The volume of data was overwhelming, a chaotic mess of timestamps, sensor identification numbers, and location markers. We spent 45 minutes running complex sorting filters, isolating the specific tags associated with the 6 missing Highline vehicles. My eyes burned from staring at the bright screen in the dim booth, but the pattern finally emerged, stark and completely undeniable. The clone tags used to spoof the main showroom inventory were not created through a system error. The vendor log captured the exact administrative credential utilized to duplicate the radio frequency chips. The hardware identifier tethered to that administrative login belonged exclusively to the mobile device Chase carried in his pocket every single day. The data went even further. The location timestamps proved the physical luxury vehicles were systematically transported to the Plano warehouse during the darkest hours of the morning, always occurring exactly 1 day before the primary lender scheduled their physical lot inspections. The shell game was fully documented, time-stamped, and preserved by an independent third-party system that Chase could never reach. We had secured the mechanical proof of the fraud, but a vendor log would not stop the emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. We needed a mechanism to kill the acquisition outright. Dana Whitaker walked through the glass doors of the coffee shop, bringing the harsh glare of the midday sun with her for a brief moment. Our corporate counsel carried a massive, leather-bound copy of the Carter Heritage Motors governance bylaws. She dropped the heavy book onto the table, the thick pages thudding against the wood, and ordered a black coffee from a passing waiter. Dana opened the binder, flipping past dozens of standard corporate resolutions until she found a section drafted by my mother nearly 2 decades ago. Elena possessed a 10% voting block on the board of directors as the designated representative for the Employee Ownership Trust. For years, my father and brother had treated that seat as a decorative gesture, consistently outvoting her on every operational decision. However, the foundational bylaws contained a dormant, absolute authority. The attorney tapped a manicured finger against a dense paragraph of legal text. The language explicitly granted the employee trust an unconditional veto power over any related party transaction, specifically triggered if a corporate officer stood to receive an undisclosed personal financial benefit from the deal. The legal pathway opened instantly, cutting through the despair. We did not need to convince Howard Bell to change his cowardly vote, and we did not need to win a majority consensus. We only needed to prove that Chase was the designated beneficiary of the management rollover provision buried in the Red Mesa proposal. If the buyers acknowledged my brother was receiving a secret 18% equity stake, Elena could legally execute the veto and terminate the sale immediately. Proving the existence of an undisclosed benefit required confronting the buyers directly, forcing them to look at the toxic foundation of their own deal. I utilized the contact information extracted from the original proposal metadata to locate Leah Morgan. She was a senior partner at Red Mesa Automotive Partners, the primary architect of the acquisition. Finding her physical location proved surprisingly simple, considering she was staying at a premium luxury hotel in downtown Dallas, preparing to execute the final closing signatures the following morning. Dana arranged a brief, informal meeting in the hotel lobby. emphasizing to Leah's assistant that severe, immediate legal liabilities were looming over the transaction. The senior partner descended the sweeping marble staircase 20 minutes later, wearing a razor-sharp gray suit. Her expression radiated professional impatience, projecting the aura of a woman whose time was exceptionally expensive. She sat across from us in a plush, velvet armchair, waving away a waiter who offered sparkling water. Leah Morgan firmly stated that strict confidentiality agreements prevented her from discussing any specific terms of a pending acquisition with a minority shareholder who had just been barred from the corporate premises. I did not waste oxygen arguing against corporate policy. I unzipped my leather tote bag, retrieved the printed forensic accounting flowchart, and placed the document directly onto the glass table separating us. I did not raise my voice. I leaned forward, keeping my tone perfectly clinical, and explained the exact trajectory of the stolen capital. I detailed how the strategic deposit Red Mesa accepted to secure the exclusivity agreement did not originate from legitimate dealership operating funds. The flowchart clearly mapped the money moving from the secondary floor plan lender, through the shadow leasing affiliate controlled by Nolan Price, and directly into the Red Mesa escrow accounts. The funds were siphoned from a duplicate loan, secured by fraudulently pledged collateral that belonged to Gulf Horizon Bank. Leah stared at the red lines traversing the printed page, the professional impatience evaporating from her face, replaced by a genuine, terrifying realization. Her prestigious investment firm was unwittingly preparing to purchase a targeted company using stolen money. Accepting that deposit meant Red Mesa was catching a highly contagious financial disease, a move that would drag their entire partnership straight into the center of a massive federal bank fraud investigation. Chase had lied to the buyers just as fluidly as he had lied to his own family, presenting the stolen deposit as his own personal investment capital to secure his future equity position. The senior partner sat back in the velvet chair, her eyes darting between Dana and me. The silence in the hotel lobby felt dense and electric. Leah was a pragmatist, a woman who calculated risk for a living. The moment she fully comprehended the depth of the deception, her professional loyalty to the chief operating officer vanished completely. Leah Morgan smoothed the fabric of her skirt, restoring her composure with frightening speed. She agreed to attend the emergency board meeting tomorrow morning, committing to officially authenticate the drafted side letter and expose the secret payout. While we sat in the plush chairs of the lobby, finalizing the logistics of her arrival, Dana pulled her cell phone from her pocket. The attorney drafted a single, highly strategic text message and sent it directly to Vance, the lawyer representing Nolan Price. The message simply stated that Red Mesa Automotive Partners possessed full knowledge of the duplicate loan structure and was preparing to testify regarding the origin of the escrow funds. The leverage shifted like a tectonic plate. 10 minutes later, my own phone vibrated, signaling an encrypted email delivery forwarded from Dana's secure server. The outsourced accountant had finally realized his fragile shield was entirely gone. Nolan understood that if the buyers exposed the fraud, Chase would instantly jettison him to survive. The terrified executive provided the original, unedited side letter acknowledging the equity retention, complete with his own digital signature, serving as the administrative witness. More importantly, Nolan included a forwarded message sent directly from Chase. The text on the screen was absolutely devastating. A pristine digital bullet. My brother explicitly ordered the financial officer to manually hide the missing vehicles from the bank auditors. At the very bottom of the message, a final instruction instructed Nolan to let Megan carry the old errors if the compliance team started asking difficult questions. The betrayal was no longer a theory or a metadata footprint. It was documented in clear, irrefutable black and white text. Just as I closed my laptop, securing the evidence inside my bag, my phone rang again. The caller identification showed my father's number. I answered quickly, stepping away from the seating area to hear him over the ambient noise of the hotel lobby. His voice sounded incredibly thin, strained by hours of continuous stress and the devastating reality of his financial sacrifice. He was sitting in his car, parked just outside the perimeter of the dealership. Chase had just issued a new corporate directive, accelerating the timeline to prevent any further interference. The acting chief executive officer had pushed the final corporate sale vote forward by 30 minutes, scheduling the boardroom lockdown for 8:30 in the morning. The window of opportunity was rapidly closing, but we finally possessed the ammunition required to shatter the glass. We had the immutable scanner logs proving the physical movement of the stolen cars. We had the authenticated side letter detailing the secret management rollover and the promised equity stake. We had the direct email proving Chase orchestrated the entire cover-up while explicitly ordering his subordinate to frame his sister. We had the senior partner of Red Mesa Automotive Partners ready to testify that the deposit securing the acquisition was funded by fraudulent loans. And we had Elena Ruiz, holding the absolute legal authority to veto the entire transaction the moment the undisclosed benefit was revealed to the board of directors. I told my father to go home, to get whatever sleep he could manage, and to meet me at the main showroom doors exactly 15 minutes before the meeting began. I ended the call, gripping the phone tightly in my hand. Chase believed he had secured the crown by locking the doors and silencing the witnesses. He fundamentally misunderstood the mechanics of ownership. He thought holding the keys made him untouchable, completely failing to realize that the people he pushed out into the cold had spent the entire night building a wrecking ball. The drive back to my apartment was quiet, the city lights blurring past the windshield in long, continuous streaks. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing against my temples and settling deep into my joints. But my mind remained razor-sharp, cataloging the sequence of evidence we would deploy in the morning. I did not feel a sense of triumph or vindication. The impending destruction of my brother's career would carry a massive cost for the entire family, leaving scars that might never fully heal. But the survival of 300 employees, the protection of the innocent customers holding worthless titles, and the preservation of my own professional sanity demanded nothing less than total exposure. Tomorrow morning, the false narrative would finally collapse under the weight of its own documented history. Chase had called the police over a silver Porsche, claiming I had manipulated a tired old man into stealing a car that rightfully belonged to him. He was about to learn a very brutal lesson about what true ownership actually required, and the exact price the system exacted when a predator tried to pass the consequences of his actions onto someone else. I parked my car in the empty garage, picked up the heavy leather bag containing the ruin of my brother's ambition, and walked toward the elevator, ready to force the truth into the light. The morning air hung heavy and thick over the asphalt of Carter Heritage Motors as the grand glass doors of the main showroom reflected the blinding Texas sun. 8:30 in the morning, my father stood beside me on the concrete walkway, his posture rigid, his hands clasped tightly over the silver head of his walking cane. We did not wait long before a sleek black sedan pulled into the private executive slot. Leah Morgan stepped out from the passenger side, her sharp gray suit immaculate, carrying a heavy leather briefcase containing the original closing documents. She did not offer a warm smile or a corporate greeting. She simply nodded to us, her professional expression acknowledging that she was here to protect her own partnership from the toxic wreckage of my brother's design. We walked into the building together. The showroom floor was completely deserted, the sales staff sequestered behind glass partitions in the training annex, watching the proceedings with nervous anticipation. When we pushed open the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom, the environment inside felt intensely pressurized. Chase sat at the center of the mahogany table, flanked by Howard Bell, the nervous independent director. My brother wore a tailored charcoal suit, his posture radiating absolute authority. A stack of red leather folders rested before him, waiting for the final signatures that would officially transfer ownership of our family enterprise to Red Mesa Automotive Partners. "You are trespassing," Chase announced immediately, his voice cutting through the quiet room before we even reached our chairs. He did not look surprised to see us. He looked deeply annoyed, like an executive swatting away an irritating insect. "The board voted yesterday to bar you from these premises. Security will escort you out right now if you do not turn around." My father did not flinch. He walked to the head of the table, pulling out his old chair, and sat down with a quiet, deliberate dignity. "I am still the majority shareholder of this corporation, Chase, and as a shareholder, I have an absolute right to attend any general meeting, especially one designed to alienate corporate assets. Howard Bell shifted nervously in his leather seat, adjusting his glasses while avoiding eye contact with both of us. "Robert, please," the independent director whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "We are trying to avoid a catastrophic bankruptcy filing. The bank is on the phone waiting for confirmation. Let us finish the transaction so everyone keeps their jobs." I stepped forward, pulling the heavy leather tote bag from my shoulder. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look at my brother with anger. I looked at Leah Morgan. The senior partner from Red Mesa sat quietly near the center, watching the confrontation unfold with cold, analytical detachment. Before anyone signs a single page of that closing package, I stated clearly, placing my bag onto the polished mahogany wood, you need to verify the source of the capital used to secure your strategic deposit. Chase laughed, leaning back in his executive chair and spreading his arms wide. Here we go again. More spreadsheet fairy tales. She brought a binder of loose paper. "Howard, because she cannot handle losing her job." Leah Morgan ignored my brother completely. She turned her gaze toward me, her eyes narrowing as she registered the calm, unshakable certainty in my tone. "What are you talking about, Miss Carter?" I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed flowchart mapping the duplicate loan disbursements from Pinnacle Capital. I slid the document across the table toward the senior partner. "Your strategic deposit was funded by a secondary floor plan loan secured through a shadow leasing affiliate called Carter Select Leasing. That loan was executed by duplicating the vehicle identification numbers already pledged to Gulf Horizon Bank. You accepted escrow funds derived directly from active bank fraud." Color drained from Leah's face instantly. She pulled the paperwork toward herself, her eyes scanning the red financial arrows and the bank routing numbers with terrifying speed. She looked up at Chase, her professional composure fracturing into pure outrage. "Is this true? Did you fund our deposit using duplicate collateral?" Chase stood up from his chair, his hands slamming flat against the surface of the mahogany table. "She is lying. That is a fabricated document created by a disgruntled former employee to sabotage this acquisition. It is not fabricated." A quiet, trembling voice spoke from the corner of the boardroom. The heavy oak door slowly pushed open, and Nolan Price stepped into the room. The outsourced financial officer looked like a man walking toward his own execution. He did not wear his usual polished expression. His shirt collar was slightly crumpled, and his hands shook visibly at his sides. He carried a thick manila folder clutched against his chest like a shield. Chase froze. The color vanished from my brother's face, replaced by a flash of absolute panic. "Nolan, get out of here right now. You have no business in this meeting." "I have absolute business here," Nolan replied, his voice gaining strength as he walked to the center of the room and placed his manila folder right on top of the Red Mesa closing package. He looked at Leah Morgan. "I am the financial officer who executed the ledger adjustments. The deposit funds came from Pinnacle Capital, and I have the emails proving the chief operating officer ordered me to hide the missing inventory from the bank auditors." Howard Bell gasped, clutching his chest. "Nolan, do you realize what you are admitting to? You are confessing to a federal crime." "I am confessing to following instructions," Nolan corrected, opening his folder and pulling out printed copies of the digital correspondence. He laid them out across the table. "Chase promised to protect me, but when the auditors arrived, he prepared a criminal referral to blame the entire fraud on my gambling debts. He set me up to take the fall." Leah Morgan picked up the printed emails. She read the timestamp on the message instructing Nolan to move the 6 Highline vehicles off the inspection sheet and to ensure nobody copied the chairman or his daughter. She looked at the signature block, verified the digital headers, and then looked directly at Chase. Her voice dropped to a freezing register. "Red Mesa will not touch a transaction tainted by active federal bank fraud. If we sign this package today, our partnership becomes an immediate co-conspirator. The deal is dead. You cannot walk away," Chase shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the table. We have an exclusivity agreement. We have a signed binding term sheet. A binding term sheet is null and void when the primary officer conceals material liabilities and utilizes fraudulent collateral, Leah stated coldly, standing up and sliding her documents back into her briefcase. She looked at my father and me. I suggest you contact the federal authorities immediately. We are withdrawing our acquisition offer effective right now. With those final words, the senior partner turned on her heel and walked out of the boardroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind her. The illusion of the corporate rescue evaporated in a single moment, leaving my brother standing alone in an empty room of broken promises. Chase spun around, his eyes wild and furious, glaring at Nolan Price. "You absolute fool! You just destroyed everything I built for us." "You were going to let me go to prison, Chase," Nolan whispered, stepping back toward the exit. He turned and hurried out of the room, leaving my brother standing over the ruins of his ambition. Howard Bell sat completely paralyzed in his leather chair, staring at the empty seats around him. The independent director finally realized the sheer magnitude of the deception he had supported. I had no idea," Howard murmured, his hands shaking. "The board was completely misled. Your fear of scandal made you a willing participant, Howard," Elena Ruiz said sharply from across the table. The service director stood up, her dark uniform pressing against her rigid posture. She reached into her metal tablet case and pulled out a formal legal document bearing the official seal of the Employee Ownership Trust. Elena placed the document directly in front of the independent director. Under Section 12 of our corporate bylaws, the Employee Trust holds an unconditional veto power over any transaction involving an undisclosed personal benefit to a corporate officer. We have the authenticated side letter proving Chase negotiated an 18% equity retention and the chief executive officer title for himself. The trust formally exercises its veto. The acquisition is permanently terminated. Chase stared at the paper as if it were a physical blow. He walked slowly back to his chair, sinking down heavily into the leather cushion. The absolute confidence that had defined his demeanor for months was completely gone. He looked at my father, his eyes wide and pleading, attempting a final, pathetic pivot back to family manipulation. "Dad," Chase whispered, his voice trembling. "You cannot let them do this to me. I was just trying to secure the future of the company. I pushed too hard, yes, but I am your son. We are family. You have to help me fix this." My father stood up from his chair. He walked slowly around the mahogany table until he stood directly beside his son. He did not raise his voice. He did not yell or strike the wood with his cane. He simply looked down at the man who had tried to steal his legacy by sacrificing everyone around him. "Megan was my child when I let you destroy her," my father said, his voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. "I spent my entire life believing that building a fortune meant protecting my children from the consequences of their choices. I was wrong. True protection means making sure they face the truth before they destroy everyone else." My father reached down, picked up the red leather folders containing the Red Mesa closing package, and closed them with a soft, final snap. He placed the heavy documents into my hands. Dana placed a formal suspension resolution on top of the dead Red Mesa agreement. "This is a separate board action," she said, "because it concerns Chase's own signing authority and access to corporate assets. He is required to abstain." Chase laughed once, but there was no confidence left in the sound. My father voted to suspend him. Elena voted to suspend him. Howard stared at the side letter, the duplicated loan schedules, and the email directing Nolan to hide the 6 vehicles. Then he slowly raised his hand. "I vote to suspend," Howard said. "And I request that the minutes reflect that material information was withheld from the independent director." The resolution passed unanimously among the eligible directors. Chase's signing authority ended immediately. His company phone, access card, remote credentials, and authority over the finance department were revoked. Dana instructed information technology to preserve every account rather than delete anything. Marcus confirmed that Gulf Horizon would maintain the limited payroll release only if an independent restructuring officer controlled every disbursement. Elena nominated Megan for the interim position. Megan did not accept on the spot. I will submit to the same background review, conflict review, and board interview you would require from an outside candidate, she said. Until that process is complete, the forensic accountant controls the trust account. I will not replace one form of family privilege with another. Chase looked toward our father. You cannot let them do this, he whispered. I am your son. My father stood beside him without touching him. Megan was your sister when I let you destroy her, he said. She was my child when I chose your confidence over her evidence. I will not make that choice twice. He handed Dana written authorization to provide the preserved records to both lenders and to respond fully to any lawful request from investigators. Chase walked out of the boardroom without his executive phone or access card. By the time he reached the showroom, someone from facilities had already removed his nameplate from the president's office. The silver Porsche was no longer in the premium display space. My father had authorized its sale through a lender-approved dealer transaction that morning. Because two lenders claimed an interest in the vehicle, the proceeds went first into the controlled remediation account. The amount released after the collateral dispute contributed to payroll and to the customers whose titles had been trapped by Chase's sold-out-of-trust scheme. The car he had called his was now paying people he had been willing to sacrifice. Two investigators were waiting outside the showroom. They did not place Chase in handcuffs. They did not announce charges that could not yet have existed. One of them showed him an identification card. Mr. Carter, we are conducting an inquiry involving two lending institutions, 6 vehicles, and the movement of collateral proceeds, he said. You are not under arrest today. We would like to arrange a formal interview through your attorney. For the first time, Chase seemed to understand that losing the boardroom was not the punishment. It was the beginning of the record. 6 weeks later, after the lenders completed their reconciliation, the software vendor authenticated the audit logs, and a federal grand jury reviewed the transfer records. Chase was formally indicted. Agents arrested him at his condominium early on a Tuesday morning. The initial charges included bank fraud, false statements connected to collateral schedules, conspiracy, and diversion of secured proceeds. Nolan began cooperating through his attorney. His cooperation did not erase what he had done. He admitted altering inspection lists, accepting the consulting payment, and using his administrative credentials to hide warning flags. He surrendered his financial role, lost his professional standing, and faced his own legal consequences. What cooperation gave him was the chance to tell the difference between the orders he followed and the choices he made willingly. The company did not recover overnight. One underperforming branch closed before the end of the summer. Several management positions disappeared. Bonuses were suspended. The employee trust retained value, but distributions were reduced while the lenders were repaid. My father's collector cars were gone. The private dealer had wired the discounted purchase price during the emergency, exactly as promised. The lake house did not become cash in 72 hours. It had secured the bridge loan. 9 weeks later, after an ordinary title review, inspection, buyer financing period, and closing, my father sold it. The sale proceeds repaid the bridge lender and covered part of the remaining customer title remediation. He never described the loss as heroic. The employees should never have been asked to pay for what I refused to see, he told me. The money was mine. So was the failure. Megan served as interim restructuring officer only after the board's independent committee approved her appointment. Every payment from the controlled account required 2 signatures. Every VIN exception required lender confirmation. A new whistleblower channel bypassed family management entirely. My father resigned as chairman before the permanent appointment process began. He retained his shares but gave up operational authority. He attended meetings as a non-executive shareholder and did not vote on Megan's employment. 8 months after Father's Day, Chase accepted a plea agreement. By then, the evidence had survived every challenge his attorneys raised. The body cam established that he personally claimed to have bought and financed the Porsche. The 2 collateral schedules established the duplicate pledge, The vendor logs established the device approvals. The email to Nolan established intent. The fund flow established benefit. The side letter established the reason he wanted the company sold. He admitted that the crisis had not forced him to seek Red Mesa. He had created the crisis so Red Mesa could buy the company cheaply and return part of it to him. Several months later, a federal judge sentenced him to a prison term measured in years. The court ordered restitution. His bonuses were clawed back, accounts containing diverted proceeds were liquidated, and part of his personal property was sold. The punishment did not come from my father cutting him out of an inheritance. It came from the documents Chase signed, the money he moved, the lies he recorded, and the system he believed he controlled. On the morning of Megan's permanent appointment interview, Elena asked her the hardest question. What happens when protecting this company harms someone in your family? Megan did not look toward our father before answering. The process does not change because of the last name on the document, she said. If the evidence points to me, investigate me. If a decision benefits me personally, disclose it and remove me from the vote. Family membership cannot be an exemption from accountability. The independent directors and the employee trust voted to appoint her chief restructuring officer. My father did not vote. After the meeting, he asked Megan to remain in the empty boardroom. I stayed near the door, prepared to leave if she wanted privacy. He did not say, "I made mistakes." He named them. "I saw your warning email and let Chase summarize it for me," he said. "I stopped you when you asked for the IP records. I signed your termination papers because removing you was easier than questioning the son I had already chosen. Then I watched you rebuild your life and told myself silence was giving you space." It was cowardice. Megan listened without rescuing him from the discomfort. "I believe you are sorry," she said. "That does not return the 18 months you took from me. It does not make you safe, because you finally did the right thing. We can build something new, but I will decide the distance and the pace." My father nodded. For once, he did not ask her to make the moment easier for him. The first letter from Chase arrived after he had been transferred to federal custody. It was addressed to Megan in his familiar, forceful handwriting. She placed it in the bottom drawer of her desk without opening it. Maybe she would read it one day. Maybe she would not. The choice belonged to her. On my last afternoon at Carter Heritage Motors, I stood beside the empty premium space where the Porsche had once been displayed. For years, I had believed ownership meant having the authority to give keys, titles, jobs, and forgiveness to whoever I chose. I had been wrong. Ownership was the willingness to accept the bill when the illusion collapsed. Chase had wanted the car, the company, the title, and the crown. Megan had accepted the responsibility. That was why, in the end, only one of them was trusted to rebuild what remained.